welcome to the MatrixxGrooove show on debate night, guys. Wow, we've got debates happening. We've got 17 posts. We've got Joe Biden in earphones and all that stuff. And with that, let me bring in my partner in justice, CENSORED. Shady.
Hello, everyone. I hope you're doing well. We're going to try this again. It's Tuesday. We got all kinds of stuff happening, so we're going to get this done.
So I guess, first of all, can you guys hear us? Are we 5-5? Are we echoey? How are we doing over there?
We shifted platforms.
Oh, my gosh. We shifted platforms. Let me go ahead and tweet this out just so people know that we are on. Oh, there we go. Tweet. There we go. All right. It's much better. 5-5. Good. 5-5. 5-5. 5-5. 5-5. Thank you for coming back, Paige. Paige Davis, we are not going anywhere. They can try. They can try. They can try, Shady.
They can try, but they will fail, my friend.
They will fail because you guys out there are the most red-pilled audience on YouTube. And let me go ahead and delete this tweet. So we're just going to get our bearings together, folks, and let's just go. We've got Q posts that we need to go through. We've got that. So let's just go through the new Q post, Shady. What do you think of that?
That sounds like a good jumping point.
All right, let's go to the new Q. Here we go. So we've got amazing new Q posts as usual. This is Q post 4787, Shady. Let's start with that one. This will be my thread for all Q posts. And, by the way, all Q posts are on this timeline for In the Matrix, guys. And this is it, Shady. This is Joe Biden. And it has a link to a Fox News article, Shady. And it says number 3. What's number 3, Shady?
Number 3 would be Biden camp will be provided with the questions ahead of time and assistance in the form of a special communication device.
Wow.
Now, wait a minute. You can't be having a special communication device at a presidential election, right?
Hillary did.
Well, I mean, I guess you can't have a special device if you're a Republican in a presidential debate.
There's a party thing here. Okay, so here's
it's got to be bias in the earpiece.
Here's Joe Biden's normal ear. Here's his earpiece all puttied in. Shady.
It looks like there's nothing there.
There's putty. It's filling up his ear hole. Say ear. I'm sorry. Ear hole might be a bad word. I don't know.
Oh, wait. Flip the screen up for these guys, man.
Okay, guys, you got it. I am so sorry, and you guys are amazing.
They wanted to see the ear hole too.
All right, let's go back and do this again. Shady, let's go over new Q posts.
All right.
Here we go. I love you guys. Thank you. I don't know. I wanted to throw my computer through the wall, and it's not the computer.
He did not do that.
I didn't.
He goosed Frobot. It was very good.
I was upset though. 4787, Shady. Here it is. Biden camp will be provided the questions ahead of time and assistance in the form of a special communication device puttied up on his ear hole.
It's an ear. Well, maybe some models don't come with an ear hole.
Joe Biden has ear hole. All right, that's number 3. Let's go to the article, Shady. Trump camp seeks extra debate rule. Third-party inspectors to look for electronic devices in candidates' ears.
I agree.
Why not?
I vote yay.
Yeah, he said no right away. Why? Why? Look, if I'm not going to wear an ear hole device, I'm not going to say no. I'm going to say, sure, let's bring it on. Or,
if
I am wearing an ear hole device, Shady, what happens?
That's not a problem. Just.
But if I'm wearing an ear hole device, Shady, what happens? I would say what? Would I say yes or no?
I think that you would probably say no.
No. Exactamundo. Exactamundo. And there'd be no handshakes between Biden and Trump at debate.
Are they not going to fist bump or elbow?
They're going to elbow. Look at this. Mock debaters stand on stage. Are you freaking kidding me? Take off the damn masks. The Union and the Constitution forever. And here they are standing under such a beautiful slogan with stupid masks, Shady.
Yeah, they are. They're really running this narrative into the ground, aren't they?
Doesn't that get your gander? There's
doesn't
QD
say.
out there today. Thank you, QD. She's dropped support the Patreon channel. It's patreon.com/intheMatrixx with 3 X's. Thank you for that. Beautiful mods out there, Shady. We couldn't do this without them. Let me tell you.
Well, man, I really wanted to say real quick, we had a great show yesterday with G. Edward Griffin. If you missed that, please go back and catch it. But,
Damn, I almost missed it, Shady.
Well, you were there.
I was there, but I was in the Matrix the whole time.
We got it worked out. That's
We got
part of the
echoing. I mean, I was so embarrassed, Shady.
We got it. We got it worked out, man. I don't think that he noticed in he was really good. I really appreciated him sharing his perspective about the earlier years whenever there was no internet, whenever there was black and white TV.
And Dark Brain said it best. It's a cochlear implant. You can't see his earpiece.
They should paint like a little hole on it.
They did paint a hole. It looks like it. All right. Speaking of holes, this a-hole, this is the next Q post, 4788. The same guy that wrote condemning QAnon and rejecting the conspiracy theories it promotes,
right,
is Rep. Tom Malinowski.
Right.
He's in the House Judiciary Intelligent Permanent Select. He referred to the committee.
Committee on Intelligence.
Yeah, he's intelligent. For a period of, whatever. So look at what he does. Here he is. Here's a press update. Tom Malinowski lobbied to protect sexual predators. Tom Malinowski worked to ensure sex offenders who violated children would not have to join a national sex offender registry and pushed for sexual predators to receive more lenient sentences. Okay, those who scream the loudest. Q.
I'm confused.
Shady, so tell me how you're confused.
Okay, so you're telling me that the person who's introducing the bill on the House floor against Q and any conspiracy connected to it, because they keep screaming that they say it's a left-wing satanic group of pedophiles. So
it's
that would
HR,
be one of your conspiracies.
Here it is. It's HR 1154, Shady. This is it. Here it is. Yep, this is what. So following along, keep going.
Well, yeah. So that you would be literally trying to protect yourself, it would seem.
Or people that have a gun to your head. Because I would not put this bill on the floor. Would you? Who would put this gosh darn bill right here? Who would make this happen, Shady?
Very sick, twisted individuals.
Yeah, these people are sick. Look at this. This guy says that that we're rejecting your conspiracies. You are conspiracy theorists, and you promote conspiracies, yet I pass a bill to save sexual offenders who violated children, Shady.
Well, I mean, Q
and have them not join the National Sex Offender Registry so they can live right next to you.
Well, Q told me there was no Russia collusion. That turned out to be right. Q told me that John McCain wasn't going to make it very long. That turned out to be right.
30 days exactly.
Q told me that HCQ was a cure or a treatment for COVID.
Yep.
And so it seems like that this guy might be lying to me.
Yeah, this guy's lying to you, and you and doing your own research out there, the most red-pilled audience out there in YouTube, you guys know better. You guys know better. And they are acting like we don't. In fact, I went over to here, and let me look at my messages here. Let me see. So this was the CBS Morning News guy, Dan Patterson. I said, hey, will you report on that?
Oh, no response?
No. How about this? How about, Biden's Texas political director implicated a massive vote fraud? Report on that? How about that? How about, hey, how did you find, okay, so look, how about this? Are you going to report on this? Are you going to report on this? Are you going to report on it? Are you?
They don't seem interested.
No, they don't.
I mean, they really, whenever you help prop up a coup, you kind of get disinterested in figuring out who the people were that were working on it with you.
Yeah.
It's just something about this whole end game of treason thing that gets them nervous.
It does.
It
does. Or he doesn't know. I don't know, Shady. I mean, what do you think? I have no idea. By the way, Feinstein, who voted for the rule to make you wear a mask.
Yeah.
She doesn't wear a mask, Shady.
In the airport?
Never. She probably doesn't. She's probably going to China. For fuck's sake.
Well, she doesn't even have to wear a mask,
Nope.
huh?
Larry, she's laughing at you. Neither does this one, Shady.
Man, well, it seems like there's rules for them and that are different than the rules for me.
And we want equal justice under the law.
That would be a breath of fresh air.
Period.
You won't be able to arrest me or cite me.
Nope. Nope. And they muted this because there's going to be information that was not available to the public, or they know that we were all listening and making fun of them, Shady.
Well, yeah, just an update. We were listening to the Flynn hearings that were going on, and I swear if I hear Fokker one more time, I think I'm going to like have an episode, maybe an epileptic seizure. But
hey, Fokker, can you milk me?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, can we stop with talking about Fokker and let's talk about the idea that there's no prosecutor in this case and it needs to be dismissed, but probably not.
Yeah, Don Q says, just us. It's justice for just us.
Justice for just us.
Yes. You didn't know that, Shady? Come on.
No, I always thought it was just collection of revenue.
Unjust. All right, so this is the tweet I did yesterday, by the way, and this is right here, this Tafcag guy. This is 17 Grasshopper 17, who was tweeted by POTUS. Sorry, Anon language coming out. This is it right here. This is who to go follow. He look at, he's getting a lot of followers back. So
great, wonderful Anon with lots of really hardcore creative spirit towards this movement.
That's right. And somebody says there's new Q. Oh,
well, there it is.
You don't say. Let's reload this. Here we go. Thank you very much, audience member. Oh my gosh. So this is 4789. It is not a picture of Pepe. Podcast yesterday, intentional or careless? There it is. Look at that. And
there's the book.
Poussaint and I and everybody were just talking about this too. In fact, we were just talking about Biden's ear hole before POTUS. Anons are on top of it, folks. We know, folks. You know. And if the mainstream media, keeps saying that everything's false, they're actually losing credibility because not everything is false. More than likely, there is some disinformation in there. I'll give them that. But it's not false, Shady.
Yeah,
so,
there's some pretty disturbing artwork in that book. I saw this last night. She decided to prop up her computer for her live stream.
Here it is. Here it's by Lucio Bubaco, right there. And let me tell you, here's the erotics. And why don't you read the about? Can you see it on the screen?
Bubaco, works in glass are unparalleled examples of extraordinary Vietnam flame technique, a witty play with the borders of kitsch and biblical and Kamovsky or Valesque iconography, masterful glass art from Murano. Most of the subjects of Bubaco's 1957 glass art are provocative and polarizing. At the same time, they are sensual and beguiling in a kind of erotic trance dance. I don't know what that word is, and frequently righteous, nightmarish, fabulous creatures.
Mesopotamian.
Is what?
Mesopotamian. Mesopotamian. It's a style, I guess.
Phantoms are virtually undulate about each other. Each is
mythological phantoms, aka the devil.
Right.
Pan.
Technical. You read it.
It's just basically it's art that is that is crap. Look at, and this is the guy. This is her book, folks. She's sitting there live streaming. Hi, I'm Hillary Clinton. I'm the devil. I worship Moloch. And look at, and I don't want to. Look at this. Look at that one. All right. So you get the idea, folks. Now Q says to that podcast yesterday, intentional or careless? Q. What do you think?
That's interesting. It's almost like it's hard to think that that's careless.
Right?
Almost like a call out or a signal.
Look at this. There's corn pops. Let's look at some other books. In there.
Maybe they think that we wouldn't notice, or maybe they are being forced to expose themselves to the public right now.
Right.
It's possible.
The Price Guide to Autographs. Robert Frost. I'm just looking at some of her other things. The New York Public Library. She probably stole this. Oh my God! And look at the pic. Hey, there's Bill over there. Who's that? Is that Bill? Who's that? This is weird. Look at this picture up here.
Yeah, what's that one? I can't tell.
Some
what that
woman
one is.
kissing another woman there.
I'm looking down on the cabinet, seeing like what she's got in there. It almost looks like packs of cigarettes or something.
He's here.
Yeah.
Interesting,
What
huh?
you got in there, Hillary?
Oh wow! Jeez, these people are sick. A Southern
Anon?
Villa. This guy, oh my gosh, shady. I mean, these people are sick, and
Proud of it.
And they are proud of it. Sadly, oh, there's our show. 740 people are watching now, but yet we got 1,000 views in 2 minutes. Shady.
On the other stream, yeah, we were up 2 minutes and we had 1,000 views, and there's only 740 guys out there.
Yep, that's it.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't see a single Bible either. Both. Good question. Jeff O'Brien is saying those are probably tarot cards.
They might be tarot cards. It looks like maybe a little too small for tarot cards.
See them right here? Could be. She could collect them. I mean, they've been throughout the ages. You know, who knows? Good. Possible. Could.
Well, we also don't know which Hillary this is.
I don't know. Wait, come on now. Stop it. All right. So will Biden camp find an excuse to reason or to terminate? So it's still early, Shady. I mean, he's asking for 30-minute breaks too.
In a 90-minute debate?
Yeah.
Oh.
Poussin says, look at the books about the national parks. Yeah, that's interesting. I saw that too. Anyway, so will Biden camp? And I put the wills in here. These are actually Q posts, right? So let's listen to what Tucker has to say.
As you may have heard, the first presidential
Listen.
debate is coming up. It's next Tuesday. It'll air right here on Fox News immediately following this show. Tonight, there are new calls for Joe Biden not to show up from Democrats. Skip it, Joe Biden, they're saying. Fox's Rick Leventhal has been following that story and joins us tonight with the latest. Hey, Rick.
Hey, Tucker, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi doubling down on her suggestion Joe Biden not debate President Trump next Tuesday as scheduled. Not that I don't think he'll be excellent, she said of Vice President Joe Biden. She told CBS that President Trump has no fidelity to fact or truth. The California Democrat suggested the debates might become, quote, an exercise in skullduggery. Here are some of her earlier comments.
I don't think that there should be any debates. I do not think that the President of the United States has comported himself in a way that anybody should, and that has any association with truth, evidence, data, and facts. I wouldn't legitimize a conversation with him.
Today, Nancy Pelosi said, why bother? He doesn't tell the truth, referring to President Trump. She also said the president is a danger to democracy. Of course, the very first presidential debate of this season, Tucker, is next Tuesday night here on Fox with our own Chris Wallace moderating.
Rick Leventhal, thanks for that.
There you go. Pretty interesting, huh? All right, Shady, I did find the General Flynn here. Let's go see if we can hear it here. Let's check it out.
And I guess the second part of that question is, wouldn't it have been more appropriate to file a motion for
Let's listen into a little bit of this, guys. What do you think?
I mean, almost 100 pages talking about there's no Brady material here. There's no Giglio material the courts found. Everything that the defendant complained of that he hadn't received, he did receive. And addressed materiality and falsity, and there was no motion. Wouldn't it have been more appropriate to file a motion for reconsideration saying, Judge, you know what, we've had a new team of attorneys take a look at this, and we have a new theory here. And why should the court allow that new theory to persuade the court that it's appropriate with the fair administration of justice that this plea agreement should be allowed to be dismissed with prejudice for all those reasons?
Your Honor, I know it seems like such a reversal in our position because it's just from December where we were supporting the court's Brady order, right, until dismissal in May. But that is, as we say, partly because the defense had moved to withdraw, and that caused us to take a second look at do we have the evidence to prove this case? And we were operating under the assumption that the court would follow its normal course and say, I've never gone forward on a case where a defendant claiming his innocence and wouldn't let he go forward with a plea under those circumstances. But with that said, once we did, and of course, independently, the Attorney General had ordered the investigation after the 3 Office of Inspector General findings that knocked out all of our witnesses in this case. As that review went forward and we discovered that was problematic, it really wouldn't be appropriate for us to move to seek reconsideration because we're not disputing. We have a Brady obligation to turn over this information. So we as the information became known, actually we became so convinced and troubled by the inability, the evidence just wasn't matching up with what was said in the statement of offense. And once we discovered that, we decided this case is done, and we decided to move to dismiss. The last thing I'd say that's just so alarming that I just hope, I really want to persuade the court because I don't want the court to think we act with political motive. As we continue to do this review, even since we filed the motion to dismiss, what we found was analysts, as they're talking about, this is in the Crossfire Hurricane case, as they're talking about the process that they're issuing on this very defendant, right? They're talking about how there's a lack of predicate, and they're expressing concern that this is a nightmare. We're asking for Flynn's records under national security, for which it's not a logical investigative step. There's messages among the analysts that people here are scrambling for info to support certain things, and it's a madhouse. At one point, they're expressing relief that they're finally shutting down the Michael Flynn case, the Razor investigation, and they're so glad they're closing Razor, and yet they continue to move forward, making these requests for information that has no logical basis. And in the end, of course, what's most troubling is court's indulgence. Sure. The court's indulgence is the fact that the case agent who's there the whole time, Bill Barnett, is coming forward and saying that he did not see any predicate for this interview under Crossfire Hurricane. In the end, he didn't see that. He didn't raise any alarm bells. And he told the special counsel's office that there was nothing there with respect to Flynn. So I do need to emphasize when we say a whole team of new lawyers, we're not Monday morning quarterbacking. We're just dealing with the evidence that we're saddled with right now. And the reality is all of this stuff has become known in the last several months, including the views of the case agent in terms of motivations and how the investigation was conducted by the SCO. We're not really taking sides. We're just saying Your Honor, we never expect us to go forward on evidence like this to prosecute a guy who's claiming he's innocent. And I do want you to remember, Jocelyn Valentine has been on this case, since last summer. She has been on each of the pleadings defending this motion to dismiss. She was on the pleadings in the Court of Appeals. So there's not, she defends it as well. These are clear people that are defending this decision, Your Honor. It's not, in the end, even if there were conversations, I can't speak to anything about other communications. I'm telling you as critical, this case should be dismissed.
All right. I wasn't casting any aspersions on any individual attorneys, counsel. I have a high regard for all the attorneys, and you know that.
Press 17 to dismiss this case, guys.
Since we're talking about the 3-decade club, you'll recall that in the Tiff Stevens case, the court dismissed that matter with prejudice on the government's motion to dismiss. I don't recall whether Eric moved to dismiss with prejudice or not. I just don't recall. I think he did. But the most compelling reason then was because there was a ton of Brady, as you know, there was a ton of Brady material that was not turned over. There was intentionally withheld. And this was after trial, after a man had maintained his innocence and testified. But, the defendant was deprived of an opportunity to use that evidence during cross-examination or examination of upon witnesses. That's not what we have here, though. We don't have a Ted Stevens redo here, though, right? That's not what we're talking about here. In terms of exculpatory Brady material. Right.
I mean, I don't view it like that because, we inherited this case 16 months after the negotiated plea had occurred, right? And that's when our U.S. Attorney's Office, D.C., got involved. And we inherited, the guy had already pled guilty twice, and the defendant was still standing by his plea. You had checked with him as to whether he still wanted to stand by his plea. So in that context, the demands for discovery and even Brady is limited solely to matters of sentencing at that point. I think in the end, it was really our own review that was triggered by the motion to withdraw and the concerns that were raised by the OIG with respect to all of our witnesses in the case, and to take a hard look at the evidence. And I think we've done right. We tried to do the right thing and disclose things as soon as we got them.
All right, and that's all I'm trying to do. The court's trying to do the right thing for the right reasons, and that's why I'm asking all these questions. Either you or your colleague mentioned Peter Strzok. You know what? There was a flurry of filings yesterday. I read the letter that was posted from Strzok's attorney. I haven't read everything else, but I will. But in light of the letter from the attorney for Peter Strzok, and the government counsel certified that all emails and interlineations have been shown to all declarants for the purposes of authenticating what's been represented to me as true and accurate. I tell you, quite frankly, I was floored when I saw the letter from the attorney that there were alleged alterations in an email.
Yeah. Not that we're aware of, Your Honor. I certainly want to respond specifically, but I'd have to see that specifically, and I'm sorry that I didn't see that. And
I'll give you a chance to respond. I think, for any responses, I think a week is probably a good time. But the question is whether or not some government attorney can certify that all emails and interlineations that have been attached and appended to motions to dismiss, et cetera, have been shown to the declarants to authenticate, because it was very unsettling to see the letter from the attorney for Mr. Strzok telling me that there appear to be alterations by other people other than Mr. Strzok. So I'll just leave it at that. But I need a certification from someone at some point. Counsel, Mr. Cole, you made reference to politics not being the motivating factor here. Should the court take into consideration the numerous statements by the president on Twitter feed? And for the record, I wouldn't know how to put anything on a Twitter if my life depended on it. But there are a number of statements attributed to the president criticizing the prosecution of Mr. Flynn. So that's the question. Should the court take those into consideration? And if so, for the weight or for what other reason?
So, Judge Sullivan, as you know, the communications between the Attorney General and the President are privileged and deliberative, but I have consulted with the Attorney General about this, and I am authorized to represent to you that the Attorney General's decisions in these cases were not based on any communications with the President or the White House, and they weren't based on any of the tweets or the sort of things that you're referencing. But I'll further note, as I think Your Honor actually just adverted to, most of those tweets, they say things like they think the General Flynn's being railroaded. It's not even clear what he said is false. None of those things even meet Judge Gleason's own standard. That's not favoritism. That's a view about whether this is a just prosecution or an unjust prosecution. So even if you were to consider that, which I don't think you should, they don't even meet Judge Gleason's own standard.
Well, putting aside Judge Gleason, will certainly speak for himself. Well, putting aside Judge Gleason's view, I mean, these statements are in the public domain. So the question is, what weight, if any, should the court give these statements by the President of the United States, the Chief Executive Officer?
So I'll say two things. The decision here is a decision made by the Department of Justice. The Attorney General's decision wasn't based on the President's statement. So I don't think you should give it weight because it's not actually the basis of the decision. But if you were to consider it, I think it would just only underscore the propriety of this dismissal, because you have, as you said, the chief executive of the United States agrees, obviously, with the decision and is agreeing for reasons that are not impermissible. They're based on views of whether this is a just prosecution.
All right. I haven't researched that issue recently about Twitter feeds. I'm sure that there are courts across the country writing on the propriety of what weight, if any, to give the tweets. So within that same week, if you have some authority you'd like to bring to the court's attention, please do so, because there are a number of tweets associated with comments allegedly made by the president, and I would like to know what weight, if any, should the court give to those, or should the court just merely disregard them? So I welcome any additional input you may have in that regard, counsel.
Your Honor, may I just one more point? I think the Attorney General himself said that all of the tweets make his job harder. It makes our job harder too, because it's easy to look at the tweets and think and draw correlations that just aren't really true. And that's why I think the further we get away from the facts, the further we get away from what we've learned in this case, the easier it is to speculate to all kinds of things. I'm telling you, those of us that have looked at the evidence, I was there with Jocelyn Valentine as we, in the last several months, went and looked through the files, the former files in the special counsel's office, notes from DOJ, and found many of these documents. That's what drove this decision ultimately, was a decision that in the end, what was told to the court in the statement of defense, we just couldn't prove in terms of actual evidence.
All right. How should the court factor into its decision-making the undisputed fact that not one attorney from the special counsel's office signed on to the motion to dismiss? I recognize Ms. Valentine, as you said, she's with the U.S. Attorney's Office, if I understand correctly. What inferences, if any, are to be drawn from that? The fact that no SCO attorney signed on to the motion to dismiss, and Mr. Van Grack withdrew shortly before it was filed. I have no understanding why, but rather than guess, I'll just ask the question if it can be answered.
So that, Your Honor, I don't think is a matter that you should give any weight. There's no question here that the motion reflects the considered decision of the executive branch. It's signed by the U.S. Attorney. It's been defended by the Solicitor General. It is approved by the Attorney General. Even if you had concerns about whether it reflects improper politicization, the career lawyers in the U.S. Attorney's Office, the most senior lawyer in that office, as well as the career lawyer who's been on the case for virtually the entire time, are all on it. Why any individual lawyer is or is not on it is a matter of internal delivered branch structure. That is the sort of separation of powers harm that the Seventh Circuit in the 2005 case that we cited in our briefs said that how the United States Attorney's Office structures its affairs is a matter for the Attorney General and the President. It is not a matter for federal courts. And in that case, the court actually granted mandamus when questions about those issues were raised.
All right. Thank you, counsel. Why should the court consider Fokker binding? Fokker was the deferred prosecution agreement case. Why should the court consider Fokker binding in this case, but not Amidon?
Well, Your Honor, I guess I'd say two things about that. First, Fokker did expressly discuss Rule 48 as part of its analysis, and it had the sentence that I talked to you about earlier, and I'll read it again, which is that the leave of court authority from Rule 48 gives no power to a district court to deny a prosecutor's Rule 48 motion to dismiss charges based on a disagreement with the prosecution's exercise of charging authority. That was an essential element of the reasoning of Fokker, which, remember, Fokker reversed the district court for second-guessing the prosecutor. Amidon is the opposite. Amidon
wait, before we leave Fokker, Fokker was a deferred prosecution agreement case when my colleague refused to accept the deferred prosecution agreement. The language you just referred to, wasn't that merely dicta in the Fokker opinion?
No, Your Honor, it was an essential aspect of the reasoning. The Supreme Court has made clear in cases like Seminole Tribe that the holding of the case is not just based on the fact that it's based on the essential legal reasoning. The Seminole Tribe is one of the leading cases for that proposition, Your Honor. And the legal reasoning of Fokker relied heavily on Rule 48. This wasn't some stray sentence in Fokker. There's a whole section of the opinion that talks about Rule 48 and how the limits on Rule 48 are what I just read to you and why those likewise apply on the deferred prosecution agreement context. Amidon, though, is the exact opposite. In Amidon, there too the Court of Appeals, actually much like in Fokker, reversed the district court and said the district court had gone too far. The language that Judge Gleeson has relied on, that really is dicta, because that was talking about situations where maybe you could deny a motion, but that wasn't presented in the case, and the court didn't actually affirm a district court for denying a motion. In fact, as I discussed earlier, no appellate court ever in the history of this country has affirmed a substantive denial of an unopposed Rule 48 motion. And of course, Amidon was decided in 1973. The very next year, 1974, the Supreme Court in the Nixon decision said the executive branch has the exclusive authority and absolute discretion whether to prosecute a case. Absolute discretion. That is simply irreconcilable with any standard that says you could deny the motion because of favoritism or pretext or anything else.
All right. I recognize the government disagrees with Mr. Gleason's recitation of the history of Rule 48A. The question, though, is don't the two opinions, Fokker and Rinaldi, leave open the possibility that courts may review Rule 48A motions for reasons other than prosecutorial abuse?
Your Honor, so I don't actually disagree with Judge Gleason's description of the history of Rule 48. I disagree with the inference he draws from that history. It is true that there is evidence that the drafters of Rule 48 were worried about a specific type of prosecutorial abuse, namely rogue individual prosecutors doing things that were on a frolic and detour, whether it's a U.S. attorney out in Montana who gives a break to a prominent person out there, or an individual prosecutor who's bribed, or an individual prosecutor who just wants to take a vacation. None of that. There is no history that suggests when the executive branch as a whole makes an authoritative decision, when the Attorney General of the United States has decided that a case should end, that in a court can disregard that and force the case to continue. There's no history of that. There's no case that's ever done it.
All right, thank you. I want to shift gears, counsel. I'm going to focus on Mr. Gleason. He's been very patient. I see he's walking around now at his desk. I don't want him to be impatient, so I'm going to give him some time. Mr. Gleason, good afternoon, sir. On what authority could the court deny the motion without prejudice?
Your Honor, you have discretion to do that. It's certainly an oddity, and one of the many distinctive, unusual, really unprecedented. Although you know the Ted Stevens case certainly better than I do. But when the government makes a motion under Rule 48A to dismiss a case, the default relief is always dismissal without prejudice. I think you can canvass government motions to dismiss, and you're not going to find one, with the possible exception of the Ted Stevens case you mentioned earlier, where they seek to have a dismissal with prejudice. So it's one of the many. And boy, Judge, I'm going to answer your questions, but I have a lot to say, and if I don't say so myself, it really needs to be said, and I hope you give me an opportunity later. But on this point, the off-the-rack default rule is a Rule 48 motion is when it's granted without prejudice. Here, the government has asked for more. It's in keeping with the fact that the government has kind of erected an entire different set of legal rules and factual concerns solely for the case against Michael Flynn. But from my perspective as amicus, I think, the academic question as to whether the without prejudice off-the-rack default relief ought to be granted here is entirely that. It's without prejudice. I will say this, it is a charge pardon. The court pointed out there's the FARA case, and there's also multiple false statements. The conversations with Kislyak, there were two separate sets of conversations, the 22nd and 23rd of December, involving Russia's position on the Israeli settlements and the UN resolution there, and then the conversations on the 29th and the 31st regarding President Obama's sanctions and the requested Russian response to those. Those are separate units of prosecution. So it's not as though there's not plenty at stake. There's plenty at stake. If the government's motion were to be granted pursuant to the typical rule, and as this court knows, I have suggested to this court, in connection with the potential perjury prosecution, you should treat this case like you treat any other. There's a lot of heat, not much light, a lot of a blizzard of things that I'd like to address a little bit later, but it's a federal criminal case in a federal courtroom. It should be treated like any other. So in that regard, if you grant the motion should be granted without prejudice, but I don't really feel like I, as amicus, have a dog in that race.
All right. Let me ask you this. You've not recommended that the court preside over an evidentiary hearing. Am I correct in saying then that I don't want to speak for you. You've not made that request, and what's the principal reason for that? Is the record sufficient to enable the court to rule as a matter of law?
Yes, you don't need one, because part of your job under Amidbound, which was not overruled sub silentio by Fokker, I'll get to that later if the court will allow me to, but part of your job is to ask for the reasons, to not be a representative. Ask for the reasons and the factual basis for the reasons, and they have to be the real reasons. And these reasons are so patently pretextual that the government feels the need to keep coming up with more of them. Sometimes, in another setting, it might be the need to have a factual hearing to determine pretext, but here it jumps off the record of the case.
If the court were to deny Mr. Gleason the government's motion, would the next logical step be to address the motion to withdraw?
Yes.
Guilty plea. All right.
And that motion is. Sorry to interrupt, Judge. Go ahead.
No. You go right ahead. No.
Yeah, I'd like to address that because I can't believe some of the things I'm hearing, and I'll tell you, Judge, you don't know me. I'm not prone to hyperbole. I can't believe some of the things I'm hearing. Of course it's the case that this court would never accept a guilty plea from someone who claims that he's innocent. Of course that's the case. That's not what's happened here. What's happened here is this defendant, knowingly and voluntarily and in the face of evidence that proves his guilt every which way, pled guilty not once but twice.
Under duress.
People who don't hang around federal courtrooms don't really get.
And an illegal investigation.
Just how important it is to enter a plea of guilty.
And the same evidence using to free Flynn right now is being used against others in grand juries, guys. Indictments coming
in federal court. And those things, all of that happens for a reason. People can't plead guilty and then show up for sentencing, as this defendant did on December 18th, 2018, and see how the wind is blowing. Hear the court say, not for nothing, I'm from Brooklyn, not for nothing, but this crime was committed in the West Wing. And get a feel for how the wind is blowing and then say, whoa, I have a change of heart. And seek to withdraw a guilty plea that was entered and accepted twice. That you didn't appoint me to argue against the motion to withdraw the plea. That motion has no merit.
All right. What about the tweets? You've devoted a lot of time and effort to bringing to the court's attention these tweets allegedly attributed to the president. What weight, if any, should the court give to that material?
You should give a lot of weight to that material. And if I could address that briefly, your job, Judge, on the second prong of our motion, we've told you that we've advocated that you deny this motion to dismiss the case. And one reason is you have to get the right reasons, the real reasons, and you haven't. But a second and completely independent reason for our motion, for our opposition to the motion, rather, is that it's a gross abuse of prosecutorial discretion. And in that regard, there's a couple of buckets of clear evidence in the record, which is why you don't need a hearing. One of happens to be all the pretexts that keep coming over the transom. Honest to goodness, I feel like taking a break and looking at the docket sheet to see if another supplemental submission has been made with yet another reason, because when we point out the hollowness of materiality or an inability to prove falsity when a defendant is pled guilty as many times as this defendant, we prove the pretextual nature of the ostensible reasons advanced, and you just get some additional reasons. And I want to come back to that later if I can. But the second ground is the first bucket of evidence is exactly that. It's almost, Judge, you're familiar with criminal cases and the notion of consciousness of guilt. The fact that you get so much pretext is a basis for you to draw the inference that there's a real reason that's not legitimate, that they don't want to share with you. And these tweets are the second bucket. The actions of the president and the statements of the attorney general himself constitute more direct evidence that Flynn is a friend in high places, the highest possible place, who wants DOJ to scuttle this case. And if I can just touch briefly on some of this evidence. Flynn's an early advisor. I'm going to get to the tweets in a second, although I promise you there are more than 100 tweets and retweets by the President of the United States about this case. I promise you I'm not going to go through all of them. Flynn's an early advisor and crucial political ally of the President during the last presidential election campaign. From the outset of the case, in the tweets and in the media, the President has engaged in a running public commentary about it through media and on Twitter. We've learned here today he's consulting with defense counsel. He's closely following the proceedings. He's personally invested in ensuring that this prosecution ends, and he has a deep animosity toward those who investigated and prosecuted Flynn before the about face happened in the Justice Department. As I say, there's literally hundreds of tweets and retweets, but let me just highlight a couple. On March 31, 2017, the President tweeted that the investigation that gave rise to a charge to which this defendant admitted his guilt was a witch hunt of historic proportion. In a June 2018 interview, the President waded into the facts. Maybe he didn't lie, the President said, even though by then Flynn had admitted his guilt in writing under penalty of perjury and under oath in open court before one of your colleagues. The next month, the President wrote, "It's a shame that the FBI didn't think he was lying," a false and also legally irrelevant trope that later appeared in the government's own papers. When Flynn came into your courtroom for sentencing on December 18, 2018, the President tweeted, "Good luck." And in March of this year, he tweeted that he was strongly considering a full pardon for Flynn. Then in late April, about a week before the government filed its instant motion to dismiss this case, the president's remarks got uglier. He called the case a scam, said Flynn had been tormented and persecuted by dirty, filthy cops at the top of the FBI, as well as certain news outlets. He also advanced another false narrative that the government's adopted in its motion to dismiss, that the agents were trying to force Flynn into a position where they could get him to lie. They went to Flynn's office with the express intention of nudging him into telling, of reminding him of the very words he used in his conversations with Kislyak. At one point, Flynn said to them, a good reminder. So this notion that they're putting aside the fact that there's no other case in America where DOJ suggested some kind of defense to a false statements case, let alone a reason to dismiss one, that the person is put in a position where the FBI knows he will lie and they want him to lie. That's not even what happened here. And Judge, these case-specific communications by President Trump were made against a backdrop of an open disdain on his part for the independence of the Justice Department. Every presidency since Watergate has respected the need for DOJ independence, FBI independence from the president, but not this president. In an interview with the New York Times in December of 2017, he said he has, quote, the absolute right to do what I want to do with the Justice Department, close quote. The Attorney General himself said publicly, just 7 months ago, that the President's public statements and tweets about pending cases, quote, make it impossible to do his job, the end of the quote, meaning the Attorney General's job, and, quote, to assure the courts and the prosecutors in the department that we're doing our work with integrity. As this court showed about an hour ago, some things are so important, they bear repetition, and this is one. This is the Attorney General of the United States who said in an interview with ABC News, an exclusive interview with ABC News, February 13, 2020, that the President's public statements and tweets have made it impossible for the department to assure courts like you that they're doing their job with integrity. We pointed this out. The government doesn't disagree with any of this. It can't. Didn't even mention the President's personal lobbying for Flynn or his virulent and ad hominem attacks on those who previously involved in the prosecution, or the Attorney General's own admission that the President's interference with the work of the Justice Department has made it impossible to assure courts that DOJ is doing his work with integrity. So based entirely on evidence that's already in the public view, really the only coherent explanation to the government's exceedingly irregular motion, creating standards of materiality that they fight in every other case, but they apply to the President's friend. The only inference you can draw is that the Justice Department has done exactly what the Attorney General said was the danger of these tweets, which is a yield to the President's pressure.
All right. I have a number of other questions, Mr. Gleason, Government Counsel, and Ms. Powell. I know everyone wants to supplement the record. I know you've been preparing for the argument, so let me just afford each attorney an opportunity to place on the record the argument that he or she had prepared to make. The government, I asked a lot of questions of the government that focused on Amadam Fokker, that touched on Rinaldi. So I'll ask Mr. Gleason to address how the court should be persuaded by Amadam Fokker and Rinaldi, and also to address whether or not Fokker is binding here, and any other principal argument that he would like to place on the record. Then I'm going to give Ms. Powell an opportunity. I think I have 3 or 4 questions to ask her, and I'll give her an opportunity to supplement her part of the record with any argument she wants to make as well. And then I'll give the government a chance to, the government's a moving party in this case, I'll give the government a chance to close with whatever additional argument the government attorneys wish to make. Mr. Gleason?
Yes, thank you, Judge. You know, and I've been thinking in light of your recitation of the parties' arguments and the questions you've already posed to counsel, and I've been working at truncating my arguments at the court appropriately. And I think what I'll do is begin, and obviously the court's shown its ability to ask questions, has them, so obviously I'm willing to answer any of your questions. But I think it's useful as a level-setting matter to begin to focus on Hamadoun and Fokker with the government's argument about separation of powers. And there was a telling piece of one of the comments made by government counsel earlier. You know, their argument about your authority to deny this motion, an authority that adheres in the text of Rule 48A, offending the separation of powers doesn't work at all. And it doesn't work because it's blind to the context in which this court is acting. It's absolutely true, Judge Sullivan, that the executive has a power that is unreviewable, at least in a court of law, not to bring charges, criminal charges, at all. And it's also true that the president has a power that's reviewable only in the court of public opinion to pardon or grant clemency. But neither of those situations creates any risk of tarnishing the integrity of your branch, of the third branch of government. This case is different because the government chose to lodge a criminal case in your Article III court. Now, let me hasten to add that doesn't mean that the executive's primacy when it comes to charging decision goes away because it brought the charge. Doesn't mean that. That primacy doesn't go away. Decisions to dismiss pending criminal charges also lie squarely in the prosecutor's discretion. And I concede this, and I think it's an essential part of our tripartite, our system of government. Government's entitled to a strong presumption of regularity when it makes a motion to dismiss. But both Hamadoun and Fokker, separation of powers principles are not offended when a court's faced with clear evidence that prosecutors have failed to perform their duties in good faith. There is deference to be accorded to the executive, but it's not blind deference. There's a presumption of regularity, but it's not a presumption that can't be rebutted. And the evidence that prosecutors are acting in bad faith, that they're abusing their power, pierces the presumption of regularity, and this court is free to deny leave under Rule 48 to vindicate fundamental judicial interests and related public interests. Fokker, I embrace Fokker. I don't have to run from Fokker. There's no sense in which Fokker, which cites Hamadoun approvingly, overruled. Fokker is, you understand it correctly, of course, Your Honor. Fokker is dicta. Case involves, as you know, a deferred prosecution agreement and the exclusion of time under the Speedy Trial Act. And there's language in there, including the language read by my adversary, that relates to the executive's primacy. But the case cites Hamadoun approvingly. It makes clear that if there's clear evidence that the prosecutor is acting inappropriately, the presumption of regularity disappears. This court said in Hamadoun, the requirement of judicial approval entitles the court to obtain and evaluate the prosecutor's decisions. And Fokker left that untouched. Its dicta leaves it untouched. There's other parts of the opinion that have been read to you. Without suggest respectfully, you read Fokker as a whole. The one thing it adds, and again, I embrace it, is an emphasis on the executive's primacy in determining not only whether to charge, but in determining whether to dismiss a charge once brought. The one fundamental difference that Fokker does not do anything to eviscerate is whereas there is an unqualified power to choose not to charge. Once that power is exercised, the power to dismiss is qualified. And, you know, I think it is important to address the history of Rule 48. It's it was, to my mind, unfairly denigrated by my adversary a minute ago. It's an important part of my argument, Judge, and I think it's an important part of your understanding of what the leave of court language means, to see where it came from. We know where it came from. Back in the 1920s, there was that federal tax collector out in Missoula, Montana. His name was Franklin Woody. He's indicted on an embezzlement charge, but he wasn't an ordinary defendant, just like this case. His grandfather was Missoula's first mayor and later a judge. His dad was a friend of the governor. The first tell in that case was a warrant issued, but the marshal claimed that he couldn't find Woody. Then the government moved to dismiss the case, and because at that time its power to do so was unreviewable, it said out loud. And one of its reasons was the defendant was from a prominent family, and it added that the government didn't want to spoil his future career as a lawyer. This made the district judge extremely uneasy. He said what the government was doing, by the way, Mr. Judge said nothing about a rogue prosecutor, or this is not the official position of the Department of Justice. I encourage you to read that opinion. It's at 2F2nd 262, District of Montana, 1924. What the district judge actually said is that what the government was doing fueled the common criticism that, quote, the criminal law is for none but poor, friendless, and uninfluential, close quote. Few things are more pernicious, that judge went on to say, than the disparate treatment of defendants who have friends in high places. And he mentioned specifically how it harmed the court itself. But no leave of court was necessary, so he couldn't prevent it. He went on to complain about the fact that the law didn't even require the prosecutor to give a reason for the dismissal. But because he had to, he reluctantly granted the motion, but good for him. He wrote that opinion. He followed the law, but wrote the opinion complaining about it, and that's one of the ways the law changes, Judge Sullivan. Others made similar complaints, and then in 1941, the Supreme Court appointed an advisory committee to create rules of criminal procedure. The committee's initial proposed Rule 48 dealt only with one of the problems that judge mentioned. It required that prosecutors only offer a statement of reasons for the dismissal. The Supreme Court sent it back with a suggestion, cited a case that said that the court reviews errors of law even when the government confesses error. So it sent it back with a suggestion, give a role for the judges in policing the dismissal of criminal charges. But the advisory committee didn't get the hint, sent back a final rule that still only required a statement of reasons. So the Supreme Court itself rewrote the rule, put the leave of court requirement in it, that language that is at the heart of today's dispute. So the government's claim that the language exists just to allow judges to protect criminal defendants from prosecutorial harassment is not just countertextual. You can't find that text of the rule, of course. And it's not only lacking in historical support, but the history of this rule, of this leave of court language, flatly refutes it. The reason that language was put into the rule was precisely to empower courts in the rare case, admittedly rare case, like the one presented before you today, in which prosecutors have abused their discretion, to have abused their really enormous power to dismiss the case. It's not for nothing, but this hasn't happened in the well more than half a century since Rule 48A was promulgated. But so the executive has that unreviewable power up front before they come into your courtroom. They have the unreviewable power on the back end today. If the executive wants to take Michael Flynn off the hook, he can pardon him. But if he does that, it doesn't inextricably bind up this court, this judge, in the unseemly desire to scuttle a case simply because the defendant is a friend and ally of the President of the United States. Sorry, Judge, but to the extent I'm fumbling with my papers, the good news is I'm streamlining the argument in light of what's already come before us.
No, that's fine. Take your time, counsel.
Thank you. The requirement that the government explain its reasons, which is the direction that Amidon gives to this court, is critical. If we were allowed to hide behind an opaque claim that dismissal is in the public interest,
I'm sorry.
it would defeat the purpose.
Mr. Gleason, I'm sorry. I can't. If I overlook the court reporter, she'll leave the courtroom. So we're going to have to take a 15-minute recess. I have to keep peace with everyone in the courtroom. I'm sorry if I overlook the court reporter. She is the most important person in the courtroom, I can tell you that. We'll take a 15-minute recess.
Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Shady.
OMG.
I'm sorry. We're gonna take a 15-minute recess because this is a trial about Trump, Shady, not General Flynn.
He tweets.
He tweets, Shady.
He tweets, buddy.
He tweets.
I'm pretty sure that Twitter is irrelevant to this court case, ladies and gentlemen.
So, by the way, today is Michaelmas. It's September 29th. Basically, it's Christmas for the Archangel Michael. In Christian angelology, the Archangel Michael is the greatest of all angels and is honored for defeating Lucifer in the war in heaven. By the way, General Flynn was born on December 24th and was named after the Archangel Michael. Happy
pretty powerful day.
Michaelmas, Anons.
You can see that they're fighting him.
Yeah.
I mean, really. I mean, look what we're looking at. We're looking at a three-way court.
Okay, if somebody could fill me in, I just went up to throw some water on my face, and now I come back and the audio's gone. So did they say they were taking a break or something, guys? If you can fill me in on that.
Yep, they're taking a break.
What was the last thing you guys heard?
All right, so they're taking a break. and
it's like, yeah, we heard you go take a break. What are you talking about?
We will join that stream again. But look at this. 4 minutes ago, they're on their way to Cleveland. Let's check this out. There's no audio, but look at that, guys. Look at that. Wow. Shady, how many people are standing there, you think?
About 25 times the amount of people that attended Joe Biden rally.
Oh, my God. Oh, here it is. Let's see. Today's debate's going to be like, let's see.
Let's get ready to rumble!
Oh my God, that was good. That was so good. Oh my God. So, well done. What is going on, Q? What's going on with Q's? So we got updates on Flynn. Look, it sounds like they're just trying to buy time, Shady. In meantime, J.P. Morgan Chase and Company agrees to pay a $920 million fine in connection with schemes to defraud precious metals and the U.S. Treasury's markets, folks.
Well. Things the news won't talk about today.
So another $1 billion goes into our treasury, Shady. Why is the market doing so good? Mm-hmm.
Also, a little bit of a lead into metal manipulation in the market.
So here you go. This is a global banking company. We know who Morgan is. We know who J.P. Morgan is, don't we, guys? Creature from Jekyll Island. Into a resolution of the Department of Justice.
We had a fellow on yesterday that really knows me.
Yep. Yeah, we sure did. So they entered into a deferred prosecution agreement, a DPA, in connection with a criminal information filed today in the District of Connecticut. That's how I learned how to spell it, Shady. Connecticut.
Connecticut.
I like that. See, look, I got it. I found the missing I. Oh, wait, no, that's charging the company will have 2 counts of wire fraud. Under the terms of the DPA, J.P. Morgan will pay it's about $1 billion, guys, in a criminal monetary penalty. Let me criminal monetary penalty, criminal disgorgement and victim compensation with criminal monetary penalty credited against payments made to the Commodity Futures Trading, the CFTC, under a separate agreement. The CTFC will be being announced today as part of a criminal disgorgement credited payments against the SEC. Gosh, guys. They thought she would never lose. This would never be a crime, guys. Do you understand?
Yeah, actually, this was the law. Now it's a crime.
It used to be the law. Now it's a crime. What I also want to do is kind of go over something that I found while we're waiting for... Oh, guys. Let's play Biden-Trump bingo. This is the Democrat... Or excuse me, this is the... What is it? Debate bingo card, guys. So... Here we go. So if Biden poops his pants, you got a check in your bingo card. Dementia smile, boom. If he bursts a blood vessel in the eye, Shady, you get that square. Biden sniffs Trump's hair, boom. And if Biden says something racist, you got that. If Biden pees his pants, you get that square. If Biden forgets where he is, you get that square. Biden forgets his own name. Biden says something creepy. Biden dies on stage. That is the...
I can't believe he's made it this long.
If Biden fumbles a simple question, that one will be filled up pretty quick. If Biden speaks to his earpiece, come on, man. There's a free space in the middle. If Biden takes off his pants, then we're really freaking out. If Biden wanders off stage confused, that'll probably happen. If Biden has a stroke, God forbid, I don't like to pray, but if Biden assaults Trump, that's another story. If Biden says, come on, man, you got that one. If Biden forgets Trump's name, dude. If Biden spazzes out over Hunter, you got that.
That's going to happen.
Yeah. If Biden F's up the numbers absurdly, corn pop. If he mentions corn pop, you got that one. If Biden threatens Trump violently, Biden attacks a moderator, or moderator cuts to commercial during a Biden senile moment. There you go, Shady.
With that card and the debate, you could almost turn the debate or turn it into a drinking game instead of bingo.
Well, I think we're going to do a drinking game. We're in the midst. We got to finish that. Now, I wanted to just talk to you guys real quick about a thread I did. It's gotten very little retweets, very little engagement because, Anons are too worried about who is who and what is what and my ego and I'm a book, Shady. I don't have any book deals. I'm just me, guys. And you guys know me for a long time, being attacked heavily. Somebody is upping on an attack that they did a year ago, Shady, over a year ago in June. And I'm here to defend myself. And, people say, oh, you're attacked. No. When somebody attacks you and you swing back, that is called defending yourself. So we've been doing a little bit of that today, and it made notable on the Chan boards, and I'm very proud of the Anons out there that made that notable and did that for me. I appreciate that. But this is, by the way, the deep state gave me this decode, Shady. So that's what they're saying, that I'm getting my decodes from the deep state.
Yeah, I've heard that chatter.
Yeah. So, no, this is all my own research. The Paysur research is clearly marked on. There was a group dig. Tupelo, we've clearly mentioned that is the person that said, hey, check into P and Paysur. And Sure enough, we did, and I connected a lot of the Q posts to information that a lot of Anons dug up. It was a very awesome dig, and I loved it. Poussaint was part of that. She knows. So this is, why did Obama get rid of EO 13583, you ask? Well, the government-wide diversity and inclusion training, you've heard that, by 2020 will include the implementation of Marxist critical race theory training in all federal agencies, including the military, Shady.
Yeah, that sounds like a bad idea.
Sounds like they're bringing in communism, folks, huh?
Yeah, that really sounds like that they're executive ordering communism to me. But maybe I'm reading it wrong.
Yeah, they're executive ordering communism. That's exactly right. So retired Obama-era flag and general officers, we call them FOGOs because they're fear of missing out, FOMOs. Those FOMOs are FOGOs. Those FOGOs are FOMOs. In direct violation of Article 88 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, have publicly criticized your president, Donald J. Trump, and even called him a threat to national security. Huh.
Yeah, imagine that, right?
So we got a bunch of FOGOs that are commies. You understand?
And they are going to defend their communist ideology within the structure of the government.
That's right. And several of these FOGOs are even preparing a military coup that Q actually told us about. All those generals. Well, let's go to the next post. So riot coordination and select safe zone in cities, Democrats control mayors, allow staged events to allow former and active military brass assertion of unconstitutional threat to Constitution. Mutiny. This is what happened. The revolt of the generals. And these generals are commies.
Marxist sympathizers.
Yep. Pentagon distances itself from Trump on crowd control. Why? Because of the murder of George Floyd. Black Lives Matter. Senior Obama Marxist generals, guys. So these leaders are being called to testify in Congress. This is from the Military Times. And this makes a lot of sense now. Here's Mattis denounces President Trump and describes him as a threat. Does this all make sense now? And remember, Obama and the systematic purging of nearly 200 senior officers over 5 years and their subsequent replacement by communist loyalists, as reported here in the Investor's Business Daily, Shady.
Yeah, did Q tell us about the EAM loyalists?
Yes, he did.
Yeah. Pointed right to the communist infiltration, the Trojan horse that is inside the borders of America, has been here operating for well over 100 years. And now we are getting some momentum to expose them. They're in the highest levels of government. They are the military industrial complex that JFK and others warned you about. And they are nervous and shaking in their boots right now because the man with the pen, it still has the pen, and he has momentum and enthusiasm going into this election. And I don't think they have a chance, and they know it. They have to move.
And just here, call the ball. Remember that, Shady?
Yep.
Wow. All right, so we got the next one. I hope you guys liked that thread. It was a pretty good one. I also want to go over this. This is pretty interesting. Pelosi has arrows in her quiver.
We know.
And I'm not about to discuss right now because the fact is we have a big challenge in our country. Yes, the president has threatened not to accept the results of the election. Why? Why is that, Nancy?
Well, surely it couldn't be because of the cartel trying to control the outcome.
That's right. That's right. And we got that, and I want to go through this. This is good. Let's check this out while we're in intermission. Here we go.
This is good.
Here we go. Let me rewind her a little bit. Here we go.
Hi there. I'm a mom, and I'll be voting in this upcoming presidential election. And I'm also an idiot. I'm an idiot because I vote purely on feelings and emotion. I'm oblivious to party platforms and the real issues at hand. And I have no knowledge of policy whatsoever. Lots of people are talking about China as a huge concern. I don't see that. I don't see that at all. Because I'm an idiot. I am completely unaware that the Chinese Communist Party and Chinese companies now control ports in almost every major country in the world. The Chinese Communist Party is literally taking over Hollywood, in order to push Chinese communist propaganda. But I don't know any of this because I'm an idiot. I am completely unaware of China's monopoly on the world supply of medicine. If China decided to shut down exports of medicine and other key ingredients, hospitals in the United States would shut down within a matter of months. Oh, that's hot. The Chinese Communist Party has also been stealing our intellectual property for decades. Decades. You see, I have no clue that the policies that push for products to be made in America, the policies that push for American independence, the policies that push for the cybersecurity and protection of America directly protect my children and their future. But you see, I don't know any of this because I vote on feelings and emotion. And I vote how the women on The View tell me to vote. Because I'm an idiot.
Boom. Sounds like somebody conservative, mama. Sounds like she saw our decode there, Shady, on China. Or she's just a well-informed, God bless you voter.
Yes, very much so. Great piece there to show a direct point.
Yep. So go over to Conservative Mama over there on YouTube. Give her a big subscribe. That was awesome because she is not an idiot. I will stand up for her. And by the way, Shady, something the news won't report, but we have. Mm-hmm. And here's your China Vatican secret 2-year deal that is in the news now, except not their news, but our news. And we have today that Pompeo was being snubbed by the Pope for China. Yep. Okay? But look at all of this sauce, folks.
Who pulls the strings?
Yeah, Vatican deal renew, signaling positively and bilateral. They are funding crimes against humanity, Shady. They are supporting China, who is guilty of crimes against humanity.
I mean, take out all the other stuff and let's just look at what they did from Wuhan to Italy for the COVID thing.
That's right.
You know, they let everybody leave Wuhan and go to northern Italy, and in fact, northern Italy turned out to be one of the largest hotbeds on the planet. But then they decide that no, we're going to continue working with them.
So we've got plenty of sauce. If you guys want to retweet this or check it out and say, hey, you know, I'm not an idiot. I understand what's happening. China agreement. Pompeo is saying this is bad. They have a secret agreement with that's why we're saving Israel for last, guys, because you're going to find out about the China-Israel agreement and trying to be nice to us, right?
Yep.
So there's probably about 50 articles in this thread, guys. Check it out.
I mean, I think to some degree, you know, they're all being played a little bit to think that, you know, you play nice with us and you know, we're going to protect you a little bit, but there will come the day whenever it will come out and there will be nothing we can do about it.
Right. And again, I want to make sure that people understand that there are practicing Catholics out there right now. And, you know, this is not a slam against all Catholicism. It's a slam against the deep state, guys. Okay?
Yes. I think that maybe check in on the hearing.
Yeah. It's some guy talking.
Okay.
It's not it doesn't look like him. Poussin's like, sorry.
Okay, I just saw it too.
Poussin's keeping an eye on it. She needs her glasses. She's awesome. We love Poussin. And by the way, Poussin has actually been banned from Twitter for 12 hours. She's in Twitter jail. All right, Shady, you want to buckle up for this one, Buttercup?
Yes, sir.
All right, so let's go ahead and decode this real quick. In fact, this is a big, huge boom. This thread's actually gotten 4K likes. It's gotten some traction, but I want to point you to buckle up. Okay. The reason why I say buckle up is this email right here is it's to John Pito Esta from Elmendorf, whatever that guy is. He's a lobbyist. He says, I'm all in. Sounds like it will be a night we all need to buckle up and double down. From John Podesta. I didn't think Wetworks meant pool parties at the Vineyard.
I don't think it does.
This was 3 or 4 days before. Well, let's see what wet works is, Shady. What is a wet work?
Wet work would be an assassination or a job that is likely to include killing someone.
Really?
Yep.
Who would they want to kill?
Maybe a Supreme Court justice?
You mean Anton Scalia? This email was sent 3 days before Anton Scalia?
I think it was.
Wow. But that's a conspiracy theory, Shady.
Yeah, well, yeah, that would be people conspiring, wouldn't it?
Yeah, because they have all these conflicting reports and confusion, right? So let's take a look at the vineyard. This is the vineyard right here in Texas at the Cibolo Ranch with the pool.
Where Scalia was
murdered.
Passed away.
So I'm all in. Sounds like it'll be a bad night. Need to buckle up. And by the way, the night before the Supreme Court Justice was just nominated, Dan Scavino tweeted, "Buckle up."
He sure did.
And I've been tweeting "Buckle up, Buttercups." So this is that. There he is, right there, February 13th, just before Halloween. Oh, by the way, let's watch this. Now that we got Scalia gone, we can enact gun control.
My mom also recognizes the role the Supreme Court has when it comes to gun control. With Justice Scalia on the bench, one of the few areas where the court actually had an inconsistent record relates to gun control. Sometimes the court upheld local and state gun control measures as being compliant with the Second Amendment, and sometimes the court struck them down. So if you listen to Moms Demand Action and the Brady campaign, kind of major efforts pushing for smart, sensible, and enforceable gun control across our country, which in disclosure have endorsed my mom, they say they believe the next time the court rules on gun control will make a definitive ruling. So it matters to me that my mom's the only person running for president who not only constantly makes that connection, but also has a strong record on gun control and standards.
Wow.
Evil lurks.
Right. And let's just quickly get through this because I think they might have started back. But this is an issue. Let's check it out.
Justice Scalia passed away on a West Texas ranch last month. He had been invited there by the ranch owner, a Houston Vietnam veteran named John Poindexter.
Oh, who's he?
Poindexter found Scalia's body and made the first call for help. Investigative reporter Jace Larson has obtained a new sheriff's office report, and he's spoken with Poindexter about his connection to Justice Scalia.
Hello?
His death upended political traditions and caused a bitter fight in Washington. And it was all spurred by what happened on this remote, gorgeous West Texas ranch near the Mexico border. The final moments of one of the most powerful men in the country. The Cibolo Creek Ranch is no doubt one of the most beautiful places in our state. Its website, which lets the general public pay to stay on the property, shows unique views and promises excellent Texas cuisine. But on Valentine's weekend, its private guests were invited by wealthy Houstonian John Poindexter.
Creepy.
There were about 35 people, including Justice Antonin Scalia. Poindexter, a well-known name in Houston's elite social circles, started on Wall Street. President Obama awarded him the Presidential Unit Citation in 2009 for his heroism during a Vietnam rescue. That weekend was the first time that Poindexter had invited Scalia to the ranch.
We had lunch and then embarked on a tour of the ranch.
They spent time quail hunting.
Didn't exert himself at all, had a very pleasant time. He was, of course, his usual personable self.
After dinner, Justice Scalia excused himself to his guest room, the El Presidente suite.
He was tired and wanted to have a very long night's sleep.
It was the last time anyone talked to Justice Scalia. After sunrise the
So there you go. That's a little bit of that. But let's just finish this off. Buckle up, Buttercups. It's about to get bumpy because we got a new Supreme Court. Now, look, Podesta email, buckle up, reference to Scalia. Buckle up. It means here we are. We're going to, listen, no equal justice under the law, no accountability, escape unscathed. Buckle up, guys. Buckle up, Buttercups. Now, this is it. Think timing. LL remains AG. HRC appoints new AS replacement. RBG steps down LL steps up, new AG. That was the plan. Q. Now, I want to just really quick, let's hear about what President Trump actually thinks.
Pillow on his face. Well, they say they found the pillow on his face, which is a pretty unusual place to find a pillow.
For the second time this week, Donald Trump expressed skepticism about how Justice Scalia died.
I mean, no autopsy being planned?
You know, you're really talking about the balance of the court. That's big stuff.
This is history.
They say they found...
How about that? How about that? And buckle up.
How about that?
Right on, guys. So we've got more. Look at this. This is shot down climate change fraud. Involved in Senate-level discussions on how to arrest Hillary. Vigorously opposed Obamacare. Involved in Pentagon-level discussions on how to arrest POTUS, which is Obama. Perfect bill of health. No autopsy. And he died of a pillow over his head or natural causes. Shady.
And just so you, maybe some people aren't aware, but Amy Barrett was a protege or a apprentice for Antonin Scalia and really admired him tremendously. So us putting her back on the court is really a nose thumb to the deep state.
Buckle up.
Buckle up, buttercup.
All right, let's check this out, guys. Here we go. Resuming our General Flynn.
Extremely bad faith conduct by the government. Conduct that the Second Circuit put in the HSBC case.
Excuse me, Mr. Glisson. This is Marcos. Can you do me a favor and mute your phones and your audio devices when you're not speaking for us, please? Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it. You know, so in the heart of the reason you have the discretion is notwithstanding the privacy branch when it comes to the determination to dismiss the case, it's a qualified right, and it's qualified because when it does so in circumstances like the one presented before you, Judge Sullivan, it erodes people's confidence in the judicial branch to see you become an instrument of this kind of behavior. The reason for the requirement that the government not only state reasons, but provide factual basis to the reasons is because if they were able to hide behind an opaque claim that dismissals in the public interest, it would defeat the purpose of the leave of court requirement. I mean, the incantation alone would send you right back to the rubber stamp days that the Supreme Court decided judges would no longer have to live in. And it would deprive you of the opportunity, the obligation that Amidon gives to you and Fokker doesn't touch to defer to the government's stated reasons, but not defer blindly and examine them. So, you know, when the power was unchecked, as the Cowan court says, this is a power to check power. When it was unchecked, the prosecutor, if she chose to or he chose to, could say to the judge, squirm all you want about being the instrument of our unseemly conduct, but just grant the motion because you have to, because the defendant has a friend in a high place. But Rule 48 changed that. And now, obviously the incentive to act on pretext in unseemly circumstances like that was created by Rule 48 itself. Now, what I want to do is turn to exactly what's happening here. And Judge, I'd like you to give me, it's not that long. Sure. I would like to walk through the stated basis for this motion as made, and then I'm just going to talk briefly about the stones to which the government has jumped midstream because the stated bases hold no water at all. And then I'll sum up very briefly. Let me start with materiality. The government, to back up, Flynn was interviewed by the FBI, and it was conducting an investigation, Judge, into possible coordination between Trump campaign officials and the Russian government. Flynn was a campaign advisor. He had traveled to and business ties with Russia. And just a month prior to this interview in which he made his false statements, he had inappropriate back channel requests that he made of the Russian ambassador. When the FBI repeatedly asked him about those communications, he lied. That is, I'm a former prosecutor, you've been around the courtroom a long time. That's about as straightforward a case of materiality as this court will ever see. Under the actual law, not the standards the government has put forth just for Michael Flynn, the test is objective, it's false statements material, if it has a natural tendency to influence or is capable of influencing either a discrete decision or other function of the agency to you look, and I've curtailed this quite a bit, Your Honor, since your summary. You look at the qualities of the false statement and ask whether they're capable of affecting the general function of the agency that the agency is performing. Flynn's lies not only potentially affected, but actually affected, according to the government itself. In prior iterations in this case, the course of the FBI's investigation. The earlier submissions by the government stated they were, quote, absolutely material, close quote, because they prevented the FBI from learning why his communications with Kislyak occurred. They raised questions about why the defendant would lie to the FBI about those communications and fundamentally influenced the FBI's investigative activity going forward. The government itself said that, and the court agreed with it in your ruling back last December. And how could you not? To put this very succinctly and very bluntly, pursuant to an active investigation into whether Trump campaign officials coordinated activities with the government of Russia, one of those officials lied to the FBI about coordinating activities with the government of Russia. The contortions the government is engaged in to contradict its own filings are not pretty. When was the last time, Judge Sullivan, you had a case where the DOJ took the position that a lack of predication for an investigation mattered even in the slightest in a false statements case, let alone warranted dismissal of the case? For one thing, the premise is just false. Predication is never a prerequisite for the FBI to conduct the kind of voluntary interview that happened in this case. But even if it were, I'll bet you've heard, I did when I was in your position, I'll bet you've heard what I'm about to say hundreds of times from the mouths of prosecutors. A violation of internal guidelines never gives rise to any rights on the part of the defendant. We pointed that out in writing, and the government's silence in that respect is deafening. It's jettisoned any reliance on what it previously characterized to you as a critical predication threshold. On the backbone of the original motion, now it's gone, like a red flag for pretext. The government also relies on a draft memo that would have closed Crossfire Razor, the Flynn-specific investigation under the Crossfire Hurricane umbrella. Because of Flynn's subsequent crimes, the Crossfire Razor was not closed. But honestly, Judge, whoever heard of such a memo mattering even to a defendant, let alone to the government, let alone becoming a basis for dismissing a case after the defendant has twice pled guilty? And since when does it matter if and since when does it matter that the point in the investigation, the FBI classified the investigation as criminal or counterintelligence? All of these administrative things, meaningless administrative things, if it weren't such a blow to the rule of law, the government's odd disclosure of them, these administrative tidbits, and acting like they were some kind of smoking gun would be laughable. They never come up in any other case. Materiality is not complicated. Supreme Court says in the Gordon case, what statement was made? What decision was the agency trying to make? And how, in general, could the former affect the latter? The answer to each of these questions is so clear and entirely unaffected by the irrelevant arguments made by the government. One last thing about materiality, and it's the most troubling, is they've been adopted just to help this one defendant. Suppose you had another defendant in another false statement case stand in your courtroom and demand disclosure of whether the agency at one point thought about closing the investigation, or demanded production of the facts on which the investigation was predicated, or demanded to know what the investigating agency subjectively believed at different points in time about whether the defendant was telling the truth. Even if the defendant hadn't twice already pled guilty, Judge, the government would laugh at those demands. And I respectfully submit that this court, which has distinguished itself in a positive way as perhaps the most demanding judge in the country when it comes to disclosures by the government, would deny those requests. The government's also manufactured a materiality standard just for Michael Flynn. It says in its motion that a statement is material if it's reasonably likely to influence the tribunal in making a determination required to be made, and it italicizes those last four words, citing a 74-year-old case that's no longer good law. And in response to our brief, it says the prosecution was brought on the theory that Flynn's false statements had a material impact on the FBI's ongoing investigation. Those are not standards for materiality anywhere else. And I guarantee you, in every other courtroom in America where a defendant asked for that standard to be given to the jury, government will fight tooth and nail to keep it from happening. But that's the standard that they drag out from Michael Flynn's case. And Judge, I don't need to suggest for a minute that these false statements don't follow the standards, even the government. That's not my point. My point is not that the defendant-friendly standards would actually make a difference in this case, but rather that the government's willingness to try to sell them here, when you know and I know that they'll oppose them elsewhere, says so much about what this motion's really about. The government says that the interviewers went to the White House with the nefarious, I covered this before, they went to the White House with the intention to help Michael Flynn. If he didn't remember his false statements, they were going to nudge him, and they did nudge him. The government previously told this court that Flynn's false statements went to the heart of Crossfire Hurricane, which was alone sufficient to establish materiality. And then when he pled guilty, he admitted his lies materially impacted the FBI's investigation. There's no rational view of the law of materiality, pursuant to which Flynn's false statements can be reasonably described as immaterial. Let me turn to falsity briefly. As a fallback, the government says it can't even prove that Flynn lied. And Judge, this is not an argument that can be taken seriously. First of all, it doesn't have to prove Flynn lied. He's pled guilty. And, you know, one of the questions I'm going to suggest that this court asks the government when it speaks again is, does what it really mean is that every time someone pleads guilty and then they come into court for sentencing and it looks like things might not go well and they ask for their plea back, the government's going to agree to it? I don't think so. That's not how the government works. And it's not how the law works. Worse than that is the government has painted itself into an impossible corner on this. Flynn repeatedly admitted he lied. He did it in his debriefings. He did it under oath before you. He did it under oath before Judge Contreras. He did it subject to penalty of perjury the night before he pled guilty before Judge Contreras when he adopted the statement of reasons. And now he says, wait, those admissions weren't true. They were coerced by a threat to prosecute my son. But the government's position is he's lying about that. It denies that happened. So So why can't it use his own admission? There's no answer in the government's papers. This is what happens. We point out, you scratch the surface a tiny bit, point out how completely and utterly hollow the government's ostensible reasons are, and they abandon them and find some others. There's no answer. And so there's no answer to the question whether, under the terms of his cooperation agreement, they can use his own admissions. If they say they can't prove his guilt if he goes to trial, but they can use his admissions. And we know that because we can read. Paragraph 11 of the cooperation agreement allows the government to use those guilty pleas, those statements that he made during his debriefings, whenever it wants, because Flynn breached the agreement by committing perjury, which even the government itself admits. In any case, forget the admissions, Judge. Flynn's guilt is plain. There's a reason he pled guilty and cooperated with the government, and it's because his guilt could hardly be easier to prove. We know what he said to Kislyak, and we know what he said to the FBI. He lied when he denied recalling requests he personally made of the Russian ambassador. The government says it's going to be hard to prove because he lied. It's going to be hard to prove he lied because he quote, this is the government speaking, he offered either equivocal or indirect responses or claimed not to remember the matter in question, close quote. Well, that's false. Flynn also told outright lies. Happy to, the court wishes. But let me just spend a moment, because it places in such stark relief the pretext that this assertion actually is. Spend a moment on the Flynn's claimed failures of recollection during the interview. Here's one example. He was asked if he encouraged Kislyak not to escalate the situation in the wake of President Obama's sanctions and to keep the Russian responses reciprocal. Flynn responded, quote, I don't remember. The government says it would be hard to prove that was false. And Judge, this is the problem with this flurry, this blizzard of things the government and Ms. Powell says. Just think about that one dot for a second, that one data point. It would be hard to prove that he actually remembered. He was the national security advisor. He forgot within less than a month, having personally asked for a favor from the Russian ambassador during the transition period, a favor that sought to undermine the policy of the sitting president, and he forgot doing that, even though he had lied to the vice president-elect about that exact request less than 2 weeks earlier, and the incoming chief of staff and the incoming press secretary, all of whom themselves misled the American public by repeating lies publicly. Does the government really think it couldn't win that case? Of course it doesn't. And Judge, I want to say this, this isn't easy for any of us. Not easy for me. It's our Department of Justice, too. But the sad fact is you have to conclude that a worry about proving Michael Flynn's guilt had literally nothing to do with why this motion was made. There's no other inference you can draw from these facts. So the government half-heartedly throws in some other lame arguments. It says there are inconsistent FBI records concerning the interview, meaning, you know this, the agent's notes in the 302s, and there's nothing remotely unusual about there being things in the notes that are not in the 302 and vice versa. There's nothing unusual, as you well know, about statements being testified to at trial that are not in either the notes of the 302s. The government says that the FBI agents were not actually deceived by Flynn's false statements, even while conceding this was legally irrelevant. Nothing about the falsity of Flynn's statements is difficult to prove. Nothing has changed since the government itself said that to the court, said that the evidence was consistent and clear that the defendant made false multiple statements to the agents. The reasons stated in the original motion were obviously protectional, that The government and Flynn have been scrambling ever since we filed our brief to find better ones. Judge, I have to bring up the issue of agent bias. Not because it's new, necessarily, although there's a new addition to it in the most recent filing to come over the transom in the courthouse. It's been lurking around the case for years since a couple of FBI agents were dismissed. It was disclosed years ago, and Flynn reaffirmed his guilty plea after it was disclosed, but it keeps coming up. And the government says unconvincingly in part of the briefing that agent bias would impair its ability to prove Flynn's guilt. And it surfaces again in this brand new submission that just arrived, where the interview of another agent, this William Barrett, says that people in the special counsel's office had to get Trump. It's not clear to me, and maybe the government will illuminate this when it speaks, what role the government wants this to play in the court's mind, agent bias to play in this motion. But I think the court ought to put it up on the table and poke it around a little bit with the government. And let me be clear, Judge, I have no objection to criminal defendants obtaining appropriate relief when they're subjected to bias by law enforcement. But make no mistake about it, if that's what the government is suggesting here, it's an astonishing bad case. In every other case involving not just allegations but demonstrated irrefutable bias, federal prosecutors not only don't seek to dismiss the case, they give the defendant's arguments the back of the hand.
Put it in the instant pot.
Objective view of the agents means nothing, they'll say. Focus on the evidence, whether it objectively establishes guilt. Maybe if we put the
Be good to have evidence,
on the
wouldn't
stand,
it?
you can cross him or her, although they always fight that too, and often win. But as long as the offending agents don't testify, bias on the part of the investigators is irrelevant. Judge is not an experienced defense lawyer in America that hasn't run across bias on the part of law enforcement agents, not because there's any greater incidence of it in law enforcement. That's not my point. Police officers and agents are people just like the rest of us, and they aren't immune from the explicit and implicit biases that are baked into our society. But I ask you to ask the government on rebuttal whether if it wants you to grant this motion, based in part on the political bias of agents and prosecutors, what about other cases in which defendants can demonstrate such bias, or even worse, invidious, unconstitutional bias, those based on race or religion or ethnicity? Will you dismiss those cases as well, even if the defendant doesn't have friends in high places? Among the newest reasons the government has served up, it's intriguing too, it's referred to already today, is this impressive sounding claim that dismissal would be in the interest of justice. It talks about enforcement policies and enforcement priorities and policy assessments without telling us what the policies are and what the assessments are. It says these policy assessments are quintessentially unreviewable, but doesn't say what they are. And it turns out to the extent there's any light shed on what the underlying facts are, they rely on the circumstances surrounding Flynn's interview, which are exactly the same legally irrelevant facts it relies on for materiality and falsity. And Judge, if you accept the government's argument that from the highest ranks of the Justice Department, we assure you we've done this in the interest of justice, so therefore you must grant this motion, you have become the rubber stamp the Supreme Court decided to eliminate when it rewrote the proposed Rule 48 that was submitted by the advisory committee and inserted the leave of court requirement. It hasn't ended. The government keeps advancing reasons why you should dismiss. You heard some new ones today. You have this new interview of Agent Barrett. Judge, that interview happened last week, months after the government made its motion to dismiss. And Agent Barrett believes that Flynn lied. And opposing this motion, which I'm proud to do at the court's request, has become a game of whack-a-mole. In the most bizarre process I have witnessed,
you're a whack-a-clown.
The government continues to unearth utterly inconsequential administrative and investigative tidbits. It launders them through this weird investigation being conducted out of the Eastern District of Missouri, and then up they pop onto your docket as a supplemental reason.
Listen
why
how
you
nice
should
he
dismiss
sounds,
this case.
guys. Yeah.
It's sad.
Sad.
It's ridiculous, and it's sad because it's our Justice Department too. Subject to the court's questions, let me just say a couple of things, and then I'll sit down.
Is there any way you can shut up? I mean, wait.
That whenever the government moves to dismiss a pending criminal case, whether it's opposed or unopposed, it's entitled to
has caused the world to have no respect
take seriously
for
the take
America's
care
word,
clause in
nor
Article
does
2,
it fear
Section
our
3 of the
might.
Constitution. And
Let me be clear.
Substantial power
Coddling and displays of empathy towards terrorists is not a strategy for defeating these murderers, as Obama and Hillary Clinton would like us to believe.
Once the government brings a criminal charge,
that's why he is in the position he's in right now, folks.
The power to dismiss it is qualified. You're not only entitled, but you're obligated to demand the reasons and evaluate the reasons. And though you must presume them to be the real reasons, you're not required to act like you were born yesterday. The Supreme Court in 1941 put an end to those days where judges had to hold their noses and grant these motions and become inextricably bound up in conduct. It smacks of impropriety like the conduct that's happening in this case. There's a completely legit road to what the executive branch wants to accomplish.
You got it right.
One that won't erode the public's confidence in your branch.
I am infuriated when our president bans criticism of our enemies.
Do it this way.
I am certain.
Attack your own filings in this very case.
I am deadly certain that we cannot win this war unless we are free to call our enemies by name.
There's no overstating
radical Islamists and failed tyrants.
To the judiciary of which this court is a part, and to the department itself. The department to create a brand new set of rules for Michael Flynn.
Because of Obama's ill-advised actions, the world has lost faith in American leadership, and the threats are mounting.
In a nation committed to the rule of law.
Radical Islam metastasizing throughout the world. Complete lack of American military readiness to face
thank you very
multiple
much.
fronts.
I appreciate your services in this case. Thank you. I'm going to afford Ms. Powell an opportunity. She's been very patient for the last
a struggling United States economy.
She's not a moving party in this case on behalf of Mr. Flynn. I'm going to accept as true that she joins in the government's motion for all the reasons articulated by the government. I have a few questions to ask her, and then I'll give her an opportunity to briefly put anything on the record she wants to. But I do not want her to be repetitious of what the government's already said. I can't see you, Ms. Powell. I assume you're still there. Are you still there?
Yes, I'm here, Your Honor.
Right. Okay. All right. That's great. I'm sorry you had to wait so long. Let me ask you this. Why did Mr. Flynn plead guilty twice under oath?
Let's go, Sydney.
Well, first of all, Your Honor, he had counsel that was hopelessly conflicted. They had an unconscionable conflict of interest and could not engage in effective assistance of counsel under that conflict. He was not advised of all the evidence accurately that even the government, what little bit it had disclosed before the plea. And the first plea was invalid as a matter of law before Judge Contreras because he should have been recused then. The government knew it held text messages evidencing his relationship with Peter Strzok, the lead FBI agent on the case, that required his recusal within a few days later. And once a judge is recused under the D.C. Circuit's decision in al-Nashiri, nothing he did thereafter can be given any credit or use. So everything that Judge Contreras did under al-Nashiri has to be stricken and or is void. So there was never a valid guilty plea in the first place. When this court proceeded to to schedule a sentencing hearing on December 12th, which reminds me there had never been a sentencing. It did not commence. The court shifted instead to do a plea colloquy, an extended plea colloquy of which General Flynn was not informed before the proceeding. And his counsel, as the documents show that we have filed, coached him only to, if the court offered him an opportunity to withdraw his plea, to say no to that, it would only be giving him rope to hang himself. He had not had the opportunity then to consult with independent counsel. It was some months later before that happened. As soon as he did,
let me just stop you there. During the course of that hearing before me, I've been over backwards, as I always do, to be fair to everyone who comes before me. And when the question came up about his attorneys backpedaling from acceptance of responsibility, or what appeared to be backpedaling, and that provoked a discussion about, look, no one's forcing you to go through with this. If you want another attorney to discuss this, I'll appoint an attorney for you at no expense to you. And I also had, knowing that I was going to ask those questions, I also had available a conference room for him to speak with his then current attorneys about that. And I took a recess. So there was an offer made by the court to appoint an outstanding lawyer to speak with him about going forward. And I think his response to that, after talking with his attorneys and after thinking about it, was that he appreciated it, but he denied the opportunity to have independent counsel. So it wasn't as if he wasn't afforded an opportunity to speak with someone else. Anyway, go ahead.
Well, there was no independent counsel for him there at that time, and he was completely blindsided by the entire proceedings, as were his own counsel, who had told him only to say no if the court offered him any opportunity to withdraw his plea. They were still laboring under a non-consentable conflict of interest because they themselves had done the FARA filing, and documents we have filed from their own files show that they knew there were problems with the FARA filing that were created by the government itself and its allegations, and by their own files. That the statements came from the Eric Fox firm, and from the accounting records, not attributable to Mr. Flynn at all. But they had the issue of being conflicted by their underlying work on the FARA filing. It was a choice of either, we admit that we screwed up here, or point out that this is wrong, or Flynn goes ahead with the plea. And they pushed him through with the plea. There's no dispute about that. It's really cannot be contested.
Let me ask you this.
The plea wasn't valid. That was not a valid Rule 11 proceeding either, because this court did not do a full Rule 11 colloquy. It didn't ask about coercion. It didn't elicit anything that would have shown that the government knew about the conflict of interest and had discussed it with defense counsel. So the court wasn't informed about the conflict, and the court wasn't informed about the coercion of General Flynn by threats to indict his son and him the following day, giving them the Manafort treatment that was so notorious at the time, and the fact that the government was hiding that from the court because Mr. Van Brack wanted to avoid any giglio obligation in the future. I mean, this court 6 years ago, when the Stevens case came about, was outraged over government misconduct and hiding Brady. The government here didn't even give us the right names of the agents who had written the notes for 18 months, yet the court has voiced no concern about that. Well, it's concerned about a couple of dates on Strzok's text message or handwritten notes. There are Brady violations all over this case and rampant evidence of government misconduct in the words of the own agents who talk about partisan axes to grind by people in the White House the day of or before the President Obama himself and Biden met with Sally Yates and James Comey, when Comey told them the phone calls were legitimate that Flynn had made with Ambassador Kislyak because they had the transcripts of them and knew there was no problem with them whatsoever, yet President Obama, in a politically corrupt investigation and prosecution, sent Comey out to make sure he put the right people on it and continue the investigation, despite the fact every lead showed that General Flynn was an extraordinary person. There was no derogatory information on him whatsoever from any source. They had investigated him for 6 months by then, put out national security letters on him and everything else. And by the way, that investigation didn't even ramp up until after the election, despite the fact the insurance tax they discussed in McCabe's office on August 15th led to the opening of the file against General Flynn the very next day, and then sending Agent Pienka, the other agent who interviewed him, into a trusted presidential daily briefing to spy on General Flynn and President-elect Trump, or nominee Trump at the time, to collect information on him and assess his mannerisms in the event they needed to interview him later, i.e. he made it into the White House. And that information was not disclosed to us until the Inspector General's report of December 2018, after this court had already issued its ruling on denying the Brady evidence. So extraordinary Brady evidence has come to light since this court's original Brady order, which shows that
let me stop you.
For government misconduct.
Let me stop you for a second. I want you to be very precise. Since the court's ruling, what is the very precise Brady material that's been produced since the court's ruling?
Well, there's the report of the Inspector General that shows that Mr. Pienka was sent into a presidential daily briefing to spy on nominee Trump and General Flynn, to collect information on Flynn from that briefing that Christopher Wray himself found so egregious the FBI has completely stopped that policy, and the Office of National Intelligence has said that they're not even going to allow the FBI to participate in any more briefings like that. It was such an egregious abuse of trust. We didn't know that. We have more evidence now that Agent Pienka and Agent Strzok knew General Flynn was telling the truth when he talked with them, that he was forthcoming. He told them about a meeting with the Russians that they did not even know he had. We know that Agent Barnett has said there was nothing but exculpatory information with respect to General Flynn. There was no derogatory information at all. We have the new national security letters list that shows how many NSLs were sent out on General Flynn even while he was in the White House, none of which produced any derogatory information. They ran every kind of trap, wire, lead, anything you want to talk about, and there was no derogatory information on General Flynn. Yet because of the meeting with Obama and Biden and Sally Yates and James Comey in the White House on January 5th, Comey went back out, despite saying the calls were legitimate, and instituted a politically corrupt procedure, as evidenced by the agent's own words and notes now. They all knew it, to get General Flynn and thereby get President Trump. And the mantle that Mr. Gleason and this court have picked up since then is the mantle to continue a political prosecution of General Flynn that has no justification whatsoever in fact or law. It is a hideous abuse of power that continues to this very minute, and only in other countries have any of us ever seen this happen.
Have you or any other attorney on behalf of Mr. Flynn filed a... Well, first of all, let me just say I was unaware of any reasons why Judge Contreras recused. I've never had a conversation with him about recusal. I have no idea why he recused, and I've never wanted to discuss with him why he recused. Has anyone filed a motion to vacate the plea of guilty before him for the reasons you've articulated today?
It's one of the reasons we filed a motion to withdraw the plea. We've argued repeatedly that it was a void proceeding, that Contreras had to have been recused because of the Strzok page text messages that talk about meeting him at a cocktail party and discussing the case and him being on the FISA court and all of that. We provided those to the court as part of our request to withdraw the guilty plea, and I believe we even briefed it in our amicus or our mandamus petition as one of the reasons the guilty plea is void. Both guilty, quote, guilty pleas, neither one of them is valid. The first because Judge Contreras had to have been recused, and the second because this court did not do a full plea colloquy, and General Flynn still was not represented by counsel who could be dedicated to his interests.
Well, when he was before me,
under the Sixth Amendment.
When he was before me, he was under oath, and he swore under oath that he was guilty because he wasn't guilty, and asked for forgiveness. In what situations are you arguing that the court may review a Rule 48A motion, if at all?
A consented to Rule 48A motion, Your Honor, the court is required to grant. The government has given more than substantial reasons to withdraw it. Nixon says it's within their sole discretion to decide who, what, and when to prosecute. This court, for example, in its own decision in Pitts, recognized the dismissal has to be with prejudice. Otherwise, there is a potential for harassment against the defendant, and the fact that this court and Mr. Gleason would even consider waiting for a new attorney general or a new administration simply highlights the political nature of this continued prosecution.
I'm not going to get into any discussion about Pitts. I offered that opinion, but it speaks for itself, and the facts were significantly different than the facts in this case, and they cried out for a dismissal with prejudice, and the government chose not to appeal.
To fail to dismiss this case with prejudice would trigger the same concerns of Rinaldi and Pitts, that the defendant be subjected to continued harassment, except this time it would be by the court and Mr. Gleason, his special prosecutor, as opposed to the government, who has absolutely, clearly, and unequivocally said it won't stop this prosecution and not waste further resources on it.
Well, I've not appointed Mr. Gleason the special prosecutor, and don't intend to appoint him or anyone else as special prosecutor. He's appointed as amicus, and again, if you want to argue that there's no basis, you can file something within a week or so. You argue also that the court may not look, quote, in your words, behind the motives or into the reasoning of the executive, end quote. How then is the court to determine any motives? What's the extent of what the court can look at?
You're going to try to determine motive of the prosecutor, really?
Of the pleadings by the government, the at least 80 or more pages of documents. I think we're up to about 150 pages of new evidence now that shows that the investigation itself was the corruption, that it was part of the essential coup to take out President Trump, and the goal was to get Flynn first and then get Trump. That's evident from Mr. Barnett's 302, as well as the text messages and link messages of many of the agents.
All right. Is there anything else you want to put on the record? I don't have any other questions to ask you. Any other points you wish to make that are not repetitive of what the government has already made?
We have provided the new information to the court as it was given to us by the government. This court's own decision in Pitts requires it to be dismissed with prejudice. In closing, I would just say that Mr. Gleason continues to be lost down the rabbit hole on the other side of the looking glass, where nothing would be what it is because everything would be what it isn't, and contrary-wise, what is, it wouldn't be. And what it wouldn't be, it would. It's all backwards. It's upside down. In a different scenario, he himself wrote, the prosecutor can do justice by the simple act of going back into court and agreeing that justice should be done. The importance of the Department of Justice being able to self-correct, to maintain its own reputation, and to restore faith of the public in the Department of Justice itself is hugely important. As Mr. Gleason wrote then, doing justice can be much harder. It takes time and involves work, including careful consideration of the circumstances of particular crimes, defendants, and victims, and often the relevant events that occurred in the distant past. It requires a willingness to make hard decisions, including some that will be criticized. That is exactly what Attorney General Barr has done here. The president's tweets are a red herring, as is the letter from Peter Strzok's lawyer, all of which are extrajudicial and should not be considered by this court at all. In the case in which Mr. Gleason discussed, he said his assistant U.S. attorney had to retrieve and examine an old case file. He requested an adjournment so his office could do this extremely important work of reviewing it. The effort that went into deciding whether to agree to vacate who counts against the defendant could have been devoted to other cases. This is a significant case and not just for the defendant. It demonstrates the difference between a Department of Prosecution and a Department of Justice. It shows how the Department of Justice, as the government's representative, in every federal case has the power to walk into courtrooms and ask judges to remedy injustices. This is the most egregious injustice I have seen in my 30-plus years of practice, and the government, it's imperative that it remember it, that it rectify it, and that this court dismiss this case with prejudice in standard.
All right. Thank you. I want to extend the courtesy to Mr. Cole and his partner, law partner. Mr. Cole, any additional comments you wish to make in the record?
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Bupan, I'll start. Judge Gleeson said a lot during his argument, but I don't think he really addressed the key points we made, and what little he did say about those key points proves our point. I'm going to try to make 3 brief points.
Okay, and when doing so, please address the points you raised about political bias and interest of justice as well.
I will definitely do that, Your Honor. So the first point is, during his argument, did he address the quotes from the Nixon decision and the Fokker decision that I read to you during our opening? I'll read them again because they're so important. The quote from Nixon is that the executive branch has, quote, the exclusive authority and the absolute discretion whether to prosecute a case. It doesn't say almost absolute discretion unless fill in the blank of Justice Gleason's standard. It doesn't say absolute discretion whether to initiate charges, but once you've initiated the charges, you lose your discretion. It says the absolute discretion whether to prosecute a case. If there was any ambiguity about that, there's the quote from Fokker, which I also read you, which Judge Gleason also didn't address. Again, that quote says, the leave of court authority of Rule 48 gives no power to a district court to deny based on a disagreement, not even a disagreement for all of the reasons that Gleason said. Now, Judge Gleason, to be fair, on this quote, he did suggest in passing, without any explanation, that that language was dicta. But he gave no explanation for why it's dicta when it is the necessary reasoning of the D.C. Circuit's opinion in Fokker. And he certainly didn't explain how that language could be dicta, but the language in Amidon is not dicta because, after all, in Fokker, this reasoning supported what the court did, which was reverse the decision below. In Amidon, the language he cites is irrelevant to what the court did, which was, again, to reverse the district court below. So we think that...
So let me ask you this. Essentially, what the government is saying is that leave of court is required. The court, and I assume you would concede the court can do what it's doing now, have a hearing, ask some questions. But even asking a few questions or 3 hours worth of questions, the court nevertheless has to dismiss. That's the answer, right?
No, Your Honor. So, of course, in a case where the defendant opposes, the court would have a role to play to make sure that there is harassment. I'm talking about a case like this one where the defendant agrees with the government. Right, and so in a case where the defendant agrees with the government, we do think there is a role to play, but it is a very narrow role to play.
All right, where does this start and end? I need to know that. Where does it start and end?
Where it starts and where it ends is to ensure that it is the authoritative position of the executive branch. So it is not like examples Judge Gleason historically identified, where you've got an AUSA out in Montana doing something that the Maine Justice Department would not have authorized. Not where you have some AUSA who's taking a bribe on the side, that if the Attorney General found out about it, he would put an end to it. But that is the sum and substance of the role. The only way to reconcile the language of Rule 48 with the quotes that I just read you from Nixon and Fokker is to say that as long as it is the authoritative position of the executive branch, the Attorney General has made an authoritative determination, then that is the end of the matter, and that is the circumstance in which you find yourself here.
So essentially, the court is relegated to have a hearing and ask those 2 questions and rule.
In a case such as this, we do think that is correct, Your Honor. We think that is what both Nixon and Fokker show. But let me turn to my second point. If you don't agree with that, Your Honor, and so Judge Gleason's, one of his 2 grounds which he articulates is you could set it aside if it's based on favoritism. And to show that it was based on favoritism, he went through a laundry list of comments by the president. Set aside the point I made earlier that, having consulted with the Attorney General, I've been authorized to represent to you that none of that had any effect on the Attorney General's decision. Just focus on what Judge Gleason actually read to you in that laundry list. I urge you to go back at the transcript and read the quotes he read. Not once did he read something from the president that said, you should dismiss the suit because Michael Flynn is my friend, I want the suit dismissed. Instead, what he said again and again, and Judge Gleeson may disagree with it, but what the president said again and again is he thought that this is a witch hunt, and he thought that maybe that General Flynn didn't even say anything false. Now, that is not favoritism. What if it was true? I know Judge Gleeson doesn't think it's true, but let's say the president was right, that it is a witch hunt and General Flynn didn't think it was false. Is Judge Gleeson really suggesting that the Department of Justice should plow ahead anyway and prosecute General Flynn even if it were a witch hunt and even if it were false? That cannot possibly be correct. So the evidence that he is identifying to try to show that there's favoritism just doesn't prove it. What it does show, and this gets to his next standard, he thinks it's wrong. He thinks the president is just wrong about this, that there is no witch hunt, and that it was clearly false. And I'll say 2 points about that, Your Honor. The first is that is exactly the type of scrutinizing and second-guessing that Fokker clearly takes off the table. What the historical facts are here, whether the executive branch has properly determined that there are serious problems with this prosecution, is exactly what Fokker says you cannot do. But we're happy to talk about the facts, so let me just give you 2 facts on the 2 exact things that Judge Gleeson himself emphasized. On the question about whether this is a witch hunt, here's one of the new pieces of evidence that was not before Your Honor at the time of the Brady ruling. And it's a piece of evidence that Judge Gleeson conspicuously failed to address at any point during his remarks. It's the notes from the FBI Chief of Counterintelligence. The FBI Chief of Counterintelligence wrote down in contemporaneous notes, what is the goal of this interview? Is the goal to get truth or admissions, or is it to get him to lie so we can prosecute him or get him fired? It is astonishing to me that Judge Gleeson would suggest that in the face of evidence like that, the Department of Justice is required to plow ahead and prosecute an individual, when the FBI counterintelligence chief himself is raising questions about whether the only point of this interview is to get the incoming national security advisor fired. The second point was that the president made, that Judge Gleeson scoffed at, is whether General Flynn knowingly lied. Well, here are the quotes from the FBI agents right when they left the interview. This is when they were debriefing the Department of Justice and the FBI after the interview. Their contemporaneous impression was that Flynn was not lying or did not think he was lying. Let that sink in. Judge Gleeson thinks it's so obvious he's lying. Of course he's lying. The FBI agents who interviewed him at the time didn't think that he thought he was lying. And that shouldn't be surprising to anyone because, of course, as we pointed out in the motion to dismiss, General Flynn, before the interview, told McCabe he assumed that the FBI knew every word of his communications. It would be astonishing for General Flynn, assuming that the FBI knew every word of the communications, to then walk into an FBI interview room or have them walk into his office and lie to them knowingly, despite knowing that he knew every word they had. It makes far more sense that he just didn't remember the precise details that he was asked about, and that is confirmed by yet more new evidence that has come in, as Mr. Cole referenced earlier. The SCO agents, when they have been briefing the main justice, they themselves recognize that General Flynn has a, quote, bad memory. So you could have Judge Gleeson's theory, which is that General Flynn, that the FBI knew every word he had said, nevertheless decided for some inexplicable reason to lie to them, and did it so well that when the FBI agents walked out, they didn't think that he was lying or thought he was lying. Or you can think that maybe he just didn't remember, and maybe he pled guilty for many reasons that lots of people plead guilty, even though they didn't actually knowingly lie. But at a minimum, these sort of facts and all the other facts we've talked about this morning show that there's not clear evidence of pretext. This is exactly the sort of case where this court should defer to the executive branch's judgment that this case does not warrant a prosecution. And I believe Mr. Cole has a couple of additional points along those lines.
All right, thank you, Mr. Cole.
Yes, Your Honor, thank you. Mr. Gleason suggests that we're just giving the court a bunch of opaque reasons and trying to invoke interests of justice. In reality, as my colleague Mr. Mupon just cited, we're giving very specific reasons that any prosecutor would find extremely troubling and be unwilling to proceed. In addition, I'd point out, as I said, if 3 different Office of Inspector General investigations have found that your only witnesses in this case were either lying under oath, misleading a court, or acting with political motivation, or their actions suggested they acted with political motivation, how can you expect this to go forward? That's a reason. And then, of course, the director's own comment that when asked under oath himself whether he thought Flynn was lying, he said, it's a close question, you can make the argument. We don't prosecute people simply because you can make an argument they're guilty. We as prosecutors are entitled to know and believe with confidence that they're actually guilty. The last thing I'd just point out, Your Honor, is, with these sorts of facts where the agents themselves aren't even absolutely convinced that he's guilty, career prosecutors just wouldn't bring charges. I can tell you, career prosecutors looking at these facts would never have filed the charges in this case. And it's interesting because when the agents got done interviewing Mr. Flynn, they came over to the Department of Justice for meetings, and there was discussions about what Flynn said, didn't say. And of course, as I mentioned before, there was a discussion, and we're learning this all from executive level notes that we've since reviewed, but there was discussion about whether to do a re-interview. But one note, a couple of notations were pretty telling. On January 25th, a Deputy Assistant Attorney General at Main Justice asked the agents, is his recollection accurate since we didn't confirm or correct it? That's how career people were looking at this. You never actually followed up questions. You didn't clarify. He gave wrong and false information, but was it willful? And the FBI declined to go back and do an interview. Subsequent notes show that as continued to drill down on Mr. Flynn, the FBI told DOJ they did not believe he was acting as an agent of Russia and did not find any evidence of collusion with respect to Mr. Flynn. So we know when I say that career prosecutors would not have filed this charge in the first instance, we know that's true because they didn't file charges in this case, not in January, not in February, not in March, not until the special counsel's office picked this case up. So when you couple that with Agent Barnett's expressed concerns about what might have been motivating at least some of the personnel at the special counsel's office, I think it is something that we are entitled. We're not asking you to dismiss for that reason. We're saying we want to dismiss for that reason. We moved to dismiss. And we're obviously believe that we're entitled to leave of court for that. I mean, if among other things, if the accusations by Agent Barnett that the charges filed in this case were in some way politically motivated are a proper basis for us to be concerned, for us to have concerns about those things. Moving to dismiss. Okay. Now, if we're concerned about politics at the front end, moving to dismiss now is not political. It's a course correction. We're just trying to get the criminal system back to where it should have been all along. We do ask Your Honor to grant this motion today and to do so with dispatch as recommended by the Court of Appeals here. Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. I want to revisit one point about the Lowry convictions. I think earlier this afternoon I asked government counsel whether or not there was any reported decisions, either by circuit court or district court anywhere, that are directly on point with this case. In other words, analogous. And that's my recollection. Mr. Cole referred to Lowry. Lowry, though, and I've thought about this over the last recess, the Lowry case was problematic for a host of reasons. I mean, principally because Lowry was the principal investigating FBI agent, I believe. My memory serves me correctly. And he had, there were all sorts of problems with the FBI crime lab. There were no security. There was no security there. There were instances in which Lowry had checked out contraband, drug seized from defendants who were being prosecuted in our courts. And I mean, there was a host of reasons why it was compelling for those cases to be dismissed with prejudice. But I just don't see where those cases rise to the level. Well, this case rises to the level of what happened in Lowry, though. So I just have to ask the question again: are you aware of any other opinions other than Lowry? I mean, maybe I missed something in your argument, but I don't see where Lowry should, in and of itself, dictate the decision this court reaches.
No, Your Honor, look, I'm not aware of any other case where FBI counterintelligence chief said, "Is the point of this interview to get him to lie so we can get him fired?" Those cases just don't get brought in the first instance. But I feel quite confident if that had come up in another case, we would have a decision saying, of course, to dismiss in those circumstances. This is the Department of Justice, not the Department of Prosecution.
All right. And Mr. Gleason, in fairness, I mean, there were, you know, the government counsel professionally and appropriately responded to your arguments. Do you have anything in a few minutes to respond, counsel?
Sure. Just very briefly, Judge. I'll do the lawyering here. As for the Nixon case, we agree, by the way, that the decision whether to prosecute is absolute. The decision to withdraw a prosecution once it's been brought is qualified. Of course, it was dicta in Fokker. The case involved the Speedy Trial Act, and whether it was error not to do a speedy trial extension in a DPA. It was not about Rule 48A. And in fact, Amadown was. Amadown was about whether an agreement to dismiss the top count in a murder case should be approved under Rule 48A. So the government lawyers just have their law wrong. So a couple of other, not random, but a couple of other points that are worth responding to. Barnett said he thought...
I'm sorry. Excuse me. To repeat that, we have difficulty hearing you, Mr. Gleason.
Okay. Barnett, am I doing any better now?
Yes, Mr. Gleason.
Okay. The agent that they talked about, that they interviewed last week, said he thought Flynn was I want to focus, Judge, on just a couple of things before I sit down. One is, I hate to say, I mean this in the kindest possible way. They sound like bad defense lawyers.
But that's all, Gleason.
The FBI agents talked about whether they could get Flynn to commit perjury. First of all, they decided not to do it because they reminded him of his own words to Kislyak. But this notion that they're shocked, I tell you, that an FBI agent would think about inducing someone to perjure. Well, you know, where they've been. That's, you know, you look under the hood. That's what they do. But what I really want to focus on, I want to focus on the rules that they've articulated for Michael Flynn that don't apply anywhere else. I didn't hear an answer to the question whether next time there's political bias in a case, they're going to dismiss or racial bias or religious bias. I got a litigation right now. Overt, virulent, religious animus. and the prosecutor says, no, that's completely irrelevant unless we put that person on the stand. So that principle applies only to Michael Flynn. I want to know, Judge, the next time there's a false statements case and the defendant says, I would like to know whether any of the agents in the case at any point had some doubt about whether I'm guilty, because then they're going to dismiss the case against me. No, that's not going to happen. That's never a relevant factor in a false statement case. But it is for Michael Flynn. He did that. One other point before I mention this, respond to this witch hunt thing. If you deny this motion, you'll deny the motion to withdraw the plea and complete the sentence. But there's an unspoken premise that I'm not sure is correct that came up earlier in today's proceedings. The government hasn't said that if you deny this motion to dismiss, it will not continue to prosecute the case. And where would it get off doing that? They've asked this court for relief, and then if you say no, they're packing up and going home? They haven't said that yet, and I would be astonished if that's the case. It would be an act of enormous disrespect for this court, to this court. And lastly, the whole witch hunt thing proves my case. The reason this motion to dismiss has been brought has nothing to do with materiality. Every single thing these prosecutors said was flatly contradicted by the prosecutors in this very case. And to the extent they're not here to respond to it now, I have. The dismissal, the attempt to dismiss this case has nothing to do with materiality. It has nothing to do with being able to prove falsity. A first-year prosecutor, one day out of law school, could win this case. It has everything to do with the president's belief that this is some kind of witch hunt, and the fact that he brought pressure on the Justice Department and an attorney general who has said publicly that the pressure that's brought on the Justice Department by the president and his tweets and his communications makes it very difficult for the Justice Department to get the trust of the courts, and that's exactly what's happening here. And it's why you should deny this motion.
All right, thank you all. All right, it's been a very interesting and very informative long day. I'm mindful of the instructions given by the en banc court when the case was remanded. I'll take the case under advisement. The record is voluminous, and I will proceed with dispatch. Thank you. Have a nice day. Thank you. If I need further, I've talked about additional submissions within a week. I'll spell that out in a minute order. We've spent a lot of time today. I'm not going to keep you any longer. Let me just turn my attention to my attorneys just for a second. All right, second's up. All right, this hearing is concluded. Thank you all. Mr. Banal, you've been very quiet. How are you?
I'm good, Your Honor.
Your Honor,
Thank you very much.
All right.
We need an urgent transcript.
I'm sorry?
We need an urgent transcript of the proceedings
talk to
today.
the court reporter. That's always, I don't get involved in that. That's a business transaction. I'm not going to get involved in that. So thank you all. Have a nice evening. Bye-bye. Be safe.
Okay, everybody, there you go. And let's get back to... Oh, wait. They're still talking in the background. You never know what you're going to pick up on a hot mic. Let's see. How was my camera? I have so much stuff on my screen today from everything that's been happening.
guys, stay tuned. We will be on tonight for the debates. Reminder, mods, drop it off. Drop them, let them know. We're going to be on for the debates, folks. Yeah, brother. We're going to be on for the debates.
Beautiful black sky, it's going free. Free our general, the people's general.
That's JT Wild. There's our beautiful people's general. He should be free. We know he should be free. We know why he's where he's at. Tonight, do not miss In the Matrix and Shady Groove and the most red-pilled audience on YouTube. That's you. And we're going to have the debates tonight. With that, we're going to get out of here, get a little rest, get some food, maybe a little beer, having a little fun time tonight, guys. What do you think? Let's do it. Press 17 if you will be here with us tonight. 9 p.m. Eastern are when the debates start. We will start a little bit before that. And much, much love, guys. With that, can you hear me? I can hear you. 5-5, everybody. Much, much love. Look at the 17s.